of the Infrastructure Committee. We have a quorum, and just advise all members who are in the room just to maintain social distancing during the meeting. Today, the committee will consider subordinate legislation, and we will then receive a briefing from Bus and Coach NI Limited and Hannon Coach with regard to commercial bus service permits and transport integration. And we'll also receive a departmental briefing on the review of planning policy and low carbon energy. Again, as per usual, just advise those who are joining us remotely to put your mics on mute, as it may interfere with the evidence, and also if you do wish to speak to raise your hand via the icon. I don't have any apologies, although Deputy Chair may be late. Moving then to Chair's business, obviously advise members of the meeting that we did have last week, an informal meeting with Bus and Coach NI. For those who weren't there, it was actually a very useful meeting in regard to financial assistance for the bus and coach industry. And I did ask members maybe to reflect on that meeting and to agree some actions following on from it. I suppose the primary issue is on the need for ongoing support. And while we have asked for this before, I think it's something that we probably need to re-emphasise, particularly with the Infrastructure Minister, but perhaps much more broadly through the Finance Minister and the Economy Minister. But I'm content to take comments from members if they wish to make any other suggestions.
Yeah, Chair. Yeah, that obviously we're just. I would support obviously write to the Minister and see where she would be at in regard to the third scheme for the sector. An initial, and yes, the Economy Minister and Finance Department do no harm, yeah. Okay,
and I suppose it's really about a rolling support, as opposed to just retrospective schemes as we have had. Mr. Boylan?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. No, I would support that, and Mr. Buchanan obviously made the suggestions at the last meeting, and I think the actions that we agreed, I would certainly support them going forward in terms of contacting ministers. I think there needs to be a scheme to support them going forward, so I'd be happy enough to support the actions of the committee.
Anyone else at this point? No? Okay. Agreed. Okay, thank you. Moving then to draft minutes at page 6 of your pack. That's for the meeting of the 26th of May. Are members content? Matters arising at page 16, again from the meeting of the 26th of May. Do members have any issues arising from the meeting or any comments which they wish to make in addition to what's there? Content. At page 20, we have our items of outstanding correspondence. You'll see that we still have correspondence which was sent to the Department of Health on the 10th of December. And we have sent 4 reminder emails and a reminder letter. And there have been similar then for the Executive Office and Michael Gove. They're the longest outstanding pieces of correspondence.
Chair, just on that Department of Health one, what can we do in that? Because basically that's a long time from the 10th of December and with no response. So what have we got at our disposal to get a response?
We can't really do very much. We'd have written to the Committee for Health to ask them.
Have we?
Yes, but we've heard nothing back from the committee either.
Okay, so the committee is slow at response as well. Okay. That doesn't go particularly well, does it? Okay. So, content to note. Moving then to correspondence. Just draw your attention to the memo at page 27 and the suggested actions. You'll note that they're all really to note, with the exception of the Committee for Finance have contacted us in regard to an independent fiscal council for Northern Ireland, and that was something which we had a brief discussion about last week, and we were actually writing to the Committee for Finance in relation to that. So it may be something that they've requested then for us to respond with some suggestions. Do members have any comments to make in regard to that? Mr. Muir?
Thank you very much, Sharon. Apologies I'm not with you today. I do still love you all. Three things. See around the fiscal council stuff, I think it's important that we do reply to that, because these issues around finances are consistently coming up week after week, of affecting the issues that we're considering. And to me, there was, obviously it's for the committee to decide, but there would be three things that maybe they would have merit in responding with. One would be the need for multi-year budgets, and that's affected a number of things. The other one is a need for progress in relation to the Infrastructure Commission, because that's impacting upon the delivery of lots of different things. And the last one, from my perspective, would be a more sustainable funding model for NI Water. I don't think we're going to get a consensus in relation to what that is, but there needs to be a more sustainable funding model for Northern Ireland Water, so they can deliver those water and sewage infrastructure for economic growth and also for housing. So I think it's important we do respond, and that's my topic's worth in relation to that.
Okay. Anyone else? Members content? Okay, we're getting sort of nods and then silence, so we'll take that as content. Okay, and the other item of correspondence that we may wish to comment on is the response from the Minister to issues arising from the committee meeting on the 12th of May, and that's at page 73, and within that there's an update with regards to driving test, support for the bus and coach sector, which I suppose really doesn't give us the answer that we're looking for. Issues in relation to journey planner, the bus service permits and transport integration, which we're hearing about today, and officials are coming next week. And then pertinent to our debate yesterday was the private streets, additional information, and the Levelling Up Fund, and then parking enforcement. Do members have any comments with regards to any of that? Mr. Muir?
I think Carol came first, so I'm happy that he goes first before me.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Yeah, just a couple of points. Clearly, obviously, we've dealt with the issue in relation to the bus and coach, but also it's right across the transport sector. We need to look at them. We need to think back to the taxis industry as well. And I mean, if there's officials coming up, we need to address that. The other point in terms of the Levelling Up Fund, I mean, we know there was three themes there, I mean, but there was a very limited bidding window. So can we write to the department to see exactly where we're at, or what we can do, or what they're proposing to do to try and address that in terms of introducing other funding mechanisms, or just get more meat on the bones out there? Because I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot going to miss out because of that limited window, and just maybe get a wee bit more out of the department, see how they're going to address that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, yeah, that doesn't really give an awful lot of details just in relation to the engagement either with councils. So it's very light as a response. Okay, Ms. Kimmins.
Thanks, Chair. It was just in relation to the points under parking enforcement. I know I had mentioned it in the past, and we've got more lobby letters from Lisburn Chamber as well as Newry Bid in relation to their proposals around on-street parking, and I know they've raised it with the Minister. I've advised them if they want to speak to committee to write to us as well, but it's just to see if there's anything we could do in relation to that. I think, you know, particularly those two areas where they're there's central parking zones, and it's historically the evidence shows that it's quite unfair how enforcement is carried out. So it's just to raise that again, and hopefully we will get a request from them soon to come and brief the committee, because I think it's a very important issue, particularly as we move out of lockdown. And I know the Minister announced then that she was putting parking enforcement back in place as it was pre-COVID.
Okay, so are you anticipating correspondence from Lisburn and Castlereagh?
Well, no, well, we got some this week. I don't know if all committee members got it or if it was just in by constituency, but I know there's still a strong lobby on in relation to this from both Lisburn Chamber and Uri Bid because of the two central parking zones, and I mean the issues they're having are huge. So it was just to kind of raise that again and keep it on people's radar. I think we do need to take that forward as best we can.
Okay, I'm just checking that correspondence hasn't been received by the committee, so perhaps you might want to chase that up on your end. Okay. Andrew, Mr. Muir?
Yeah. No, thank you, Chair. Just in relation to another one, which is 5.7, it was about delivery of courses for drink drive offenders. And it's, I think it's important that is considered. But one thing that just appeared to me, a while ago at the committee, we were given an update in relation to two sort of related matters in relation to road safety enforcement. One was in relation to a fixed penalty for careless driving, and there was a consideration of the department to introduce that, and that would significantly benefit road safety and also the processing of those issues. And the other one was updating the law around using the mobile phone when driving, because that law was drafted when phones were like bricks and there were Nokias and stuff like that, and now it's more difficult for the police to enforce it. And I was going to suggest we go back to the department and ask them for an update in relation to both issues, because it's been a while and we haven't heard anything in relation to either.
Okay, members content? We can maybe include that an update then on where they are with the road safety strategy as well. Okay, content? Thank you. Any other items that members wish to highlight within correspondence? Okay, great, thank you. So,
I think Kat also has done that.
Mr. Boylan?
Yeah, Chair, no, just to what I wanted to mention yesterday, I mean, the debate we had yesterday was quite well balanced. I mean, clearly there's questions in relation to delivery there, so, and I know that the Minister's going about our finalisation of our budgets, but maybe, Chair, we should look at, like, the staff was cut by 50% in terms of one sector there in the VAS scheme. I mean, and there's no way that any of the departments could have survived any of that. So I know where there's a wee bit of work done or a wee bit of research done in relation to how the workforce model ended up that way. So maybe it's something, we'll wait till obviously the Minister comes back with a capital programme to see exactly and resource to see where she's going, but we need to definitely as a committee take a look at that again in terms of how the department's going to deliver. So like I say, it was a good enough, it was well-reasoned, balanced debate yesterday, so maybe it's a wee piece of work we can undertake, but I just wanted to note it for today. Maybe we'll follow up on it again in terms of the department and the resource.
Yeah, no,
Okay, Chair.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think that it's something that we're hearing now really at every presentation is the issues, the challenges that there are obviously around resource and workforce, and having, I suppose, even specialists in place in order to carry out some of the work which would have been taken for granted, I suppose, in the past. So if we can keep that maybe just as a rolling item, just to keep an eye on. Okay. Any other comments, Mr. Beggs, Mr. Buchanan?
Chair.
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 Mr. Beggs.
Yeah, just in terms of the outworking of this year's budget, just to follow on what Cathal was saying about resources. So, have we clarity of if there are further implications in this year's budgets for how the department will be able to respond to pressures, whether that is for in-year monitoring of additional surfacing of roads, or alternatively to follow up road spawns and bring about improvements for residents?
Mm-hmm. Mr. Buchanan? Okay, Ms. Kelly?
Chair, it's a different matter, but I just want to say I think you've already been informed, hopefully, that I have to leave at 11 o'clock for an appointment, but hope to get back in again. And then could I just ask, if I don't get in time for any other business, that we might ask the department for an update on the legal challenge in terms of roads maintenance contracts. I think we'd like to know where that's at in terms of time frame, if that's possible.
Okay. We're due to get a briefing, aren't we, with regards to procurement at some stage? That was certainly a request was put in for a briefing. We don't have it on the forward work programme at this point. Okay. Well, maybe just we'll
We could
follow.
perhaps raise it at the budget.
We can follow. Yeah.
Next week.
Okay. Okay, agreed. Any other member at this point? No. Okay, thank you. Moving then to item 6 at page 79. So we have SR 2021-136, the Motor Vehicles Driving Instruction Trainee Licence Amendment Coronavirus Regulations Northern Ireland 2021. The committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 26th of May and was content. The rule is subject to negative resolution. There's been no change to the policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content with this rule?
Okay.
Okay, so the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2021-136, the Motor Vehicles Driving Instruction Trainee Licence Amendment Coronavirus Regulations Northern Ireland 2021, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection to the rule. Turning then to item 7, page 88, SR 2021-137, the Motor Vehicles Driving Instruction Amendment Coronavirus Regulations Northern Ireland 2021. The committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 26th of May and was content. The rule is subject to negative resolution. There's been no change to the policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content with this rule? Content. The Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2021-137, the Motor Vehicles Driving Instruction Amendment Coronavirus Regulations Northern Ireland 2021, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection to the rule. Okay, thank you. Moving then to item 8, and it's our first briefing from Bus and Coach NI Limited and Hannon Coach. This is with regard to commercial bus service permits and transport integration. Hansard will record the meeting and just draw your attention to correspondence from Bus and Coach NI at page 97 and correspondence from Hannon Coach at page 108. And we shall welcome to the meeting via Starleaf Karen McGill, the Chief Executive of Bus and Coach NI Limited, Niall McKeever, the Chairman of Bus and Coach NI Limited, Eamon Rooney, the owner of Rooney International Coach, and Owen McLaughlin, Group Marketing Manager for Hannon Coaches. You are all very welcome. Thank you for attending the committee this morning. And can I just ask who is leading and who?
I'll probably start.
Okay, so Karen, if you'd like to make your opening statement and then defer to your colleagues.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much once again for the opportunity. I'm going to try and keep things simple and short this morning because I'm accompanied by 3 operators who all, 2 who've operated bus permits now for over 20 years, and obviously Owen from Hannon who has applications in for permits for the last 4 years. In simple terms, in Northern Ireland, we have a public transport provider that operates obviously about 1,500 socially necessary service there for the network, which is obviously how things have been done and the way we do things in Northern Ireland and accepted. It's obvious that there's gaps in the network there and that there are opportunities throughout the province for other operators outside that in terms of the private sector where they would see locally in their area an opportunity to run a service. Now, where this happens, there's been a process, and the process over the last number of years has not been either adequate or fair. So within the work that we did with the Transport Act over 12 years ago, part of the changes to the Transport Act and the update were to allow through a formal process the private sector to come into the network and to complement what is already existing within the public transport provider. There were other changes made to within the Transport Act which allowed a new standalone department to have a look at those permits and to fairly manage that process. Now, some of that has not been enacted, and at the minute we have the department itself that actually considers the applications. Now, the whole premise is to allow the private sector to come in to fill in gaps and to complement the network as it sits Unfortunately, the process has always been awkward and it's been obstructive at times, and regardless, even after what we did within the Transport Act, there's always been a battle for every service. There's always been a battle for operators to be able to run their services. Now, within the last couple of years, that seems to have become even more difficult and more concentrated, and as you know, we have written to you with our thoughts on the latest new draft guidance. Now, we have a list of issues on that guidance which we have presented to you, in terms of the first being that we learned during a meeting with the departmental officials that there had been a new process agreed by Minister Mallon. Well, we weren't party to that, we weren't consulted on, and we weren't party to that new process, but that is a done deal, and the new draft guidance actually reflects that whole new process. Now, the process itself allows for so much to change in terms of even the application process and the timescales. We're going from like an 8-week process to 32 weeks and beyond. The proof of demand has become more onerous, and there's no definitive list. The permit renewals are being treated as new applications. The determination process, the fact that they can go, a decision for a new service can go as high as the Minister. There's been omissions in terms of the journey planner, omission from the new the document for all the detail of all the type of services you can apply for. The 30-minute rule is a massive big change in terms of that whole determination. So there's been a lot of issues there for us in the guidance, and that's why we've written to you. Really, the new guidance has left us in a position where we don't believe we feel welcome to be part of the public transport network. We don't understand why the department has changed the process and has done what it has actually within this last couple of years in changing where things are. We don't feel we're welcome. We don't feel that the opportunities are going to be there. We feel we're being kept out, and it's a framework which actually contradicts that whole opportunity for the private sector to help integrate as an asset that can be used within public transport and actually be part of developing a whole network of new flexible services for the public in Northern Ireland. So with me today, as I said, I have 3 operators who have all been part of that process and the difficulties along the way. I think first, if it's okay, I'd like to ask Mr. Niall McKeever from Airporter to join us, and then we'll ask him and
okay.
For their.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you. Could I just ask that other witnesses maybe switch off their mics, because I think it may be interfering just with the sound.
Sorry?
If other witnesses, if other of your team have their mics on, if they could maybe just switch them to mute, that would be very helpful.
All right. Are we okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. First of all, I would like to start today by formally acknowledging the importance of these committee engagements with our industry. Fundamentally, it's essential that our industry's guidelines reflect the ambitions of our government's aspirations and to create an environment for them to happen. This is why it's vitally important for the issues raised in our report that they are understood in context of where we are now, where we have been, and where we want to go. I want to highlight today the correlation between the newly defined transport sector and the opportunities this presents for the future. But primarily, I want to share a personal view of being a current permit holder and the challenges imposed by these new guidelines. Airporter is a multi-award winning coach operation connecting Derry to the 2 Belfast airports. As owner-director of the operation for nearly 25 years, you would think that I was safe in the knowledge that Airporter was fully integrated into the public transport network for Northern Ireland. You'd be surprised. We have won countless industry operation awards from innovation to customer service, and we were the first bus company in Ireland to provide online real-time reservations. Airporter created a new direct access route which wasn't there before, and have grown that business from 0 to 150,000 passengers per year. We are very much part of the connectivity infrastructure for the Northwest and have carried over 2 million passengers since 1997. We have a fleet of 16 vehicles, employ over 30 people, and travel over 2 million kilometres per year. In this time, we have never fallen foul of any operating legislation and have a very well respected name in the industry. In any other business sector, this level of operational excellence and compliance would be celebrated and encouraged to grow, develop throughout the process.
Okay, it's disappeared now. Okay,
Still going.
perhaps maybe see if he can reconnect.
Karen's
Karen, we've lost Niall. Would Owen be in a position at this stage to maybe make his contribution, and we can come back to Niall when he reconnects?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
You can't see me. I'm not sure why you can't see me. I've got my camera turned on. Anyway, as long as you can hear me, I suppose. So, good morning and thanks to the Chair and the Committee for having us today. Just to give you a brief background on the Hanlon Group, we're a specialist chilled transport and logistics company based in Achilles, just outside Lurgan. We specialise in Europe fresh produce sector. We have offices in transport in Rotterdam, Paris and Dublin, and we employ over 400 people. The context of why we're here today is that in 2017, we made an application to run an express service between Londonderry and Belfast, and also 5 other applications from other destinations across Northern Ireland. I wanted to give you a brief background on that and to give you a flavour of just how the department has progressively frustrated, obstructed and ultimately blocked our attempts to enter the market, despite our applications being in line with all policy, legislation, regulations, etc. For the sake of brevity, it's impossible to go into all the details, but I'm happy to expand on any that the committee might want more detail on, or to follow up with evidence of any of what we say here today. I've broken the process down into 5 phases that we've sort of gone through. The application process is supposed to be a straightforward process taking 8 weeks. It's been common practice, and it's implicit within the department's own guidelines, that if there isn't a similar service operating on the same route, then you should automatically be awarded that permit. So we put permit applications in, as I said, for 6 routes. That was May 2017, our first one went in. On July 2017, the department turned us down and refused our application for a Londonderry to Belfast route, and subsequently ignored all 5 other applications. We were forced into a judicial review. The department at this stage also failed to respond to a series of freedom of information requests, and the ICO did eventually issue a decision notice on these in July 2022. So as I say, we were forced into a judicial review. The judicial review papers went in October 2017, and it was settled by the department in February 2018. At that stage, they committed to a period of 6 weeks to make fresh redeterminations from February the 15th. So that would have brought us up to the end of March 2018. In April 2018, the department asked us to extend the process for 6 weeks to allow TransLink to present to Derry City Council, and we obliged. We did that in the spirit of cooperation, wanting to be partners of the department and TransLink for the next 10 to 15 years. Throughout the next 3 months, we were asked for considerable extra levels of information, including advice on station priority, access to the journey planner, ticketing, accessibility of vehicles, and so on. We provided detailed responses at every stage. That brought us up to the end of June, which was our last agreed date at that stage. Then there was a period of complete radio silence. The department ignored us for a period of 8 months, despite polite requests despite us getting MLAs to write on our behalf, MPs to write to the Permanent Secretary, there was nothing. The department simply seemed to wait for something to come along, and it did so in the manner of the Northern Ireland Executive Formations and Exercise Functions Act. In February 2019, so a full year after committed to redetermine our applications, they cited this act, and they said that in effect this could be or may be a matter for the Minister, and they may not in effect make any decision at all. At that stage, they also committed to a new 4-step 12-week process. So again, that would have brought us up to the 10th of May 2019. That process only concluded just before Easter of this year. Throughout this period, we also approached the CMA, and the CMA made representations and met the department on our behalf. As Karen has alluded to, the tail end of this process coming up to March 2020 was when they started to change the process and tell the industry that they were in fact changing the process. What this has in effect done is raised a complete barrier, and it will make it impossible for anybody to make an application similar to our own again to have any chance of it being successful. From June, the department met to consider our applications. It was March of last year. Then in June, they passed the decision to the Minister, and that was with the Minister for another 10 months. On March, just before Easter this year, the department wrote to us to refuse all 6 of our applications. We met with them afterwards to get an explanation, and their explanation was simply that we did not supply sufficient evidence of demand. They provided a figure. They said that it didn't. There was no question of it having an impact on Translink, and that didn't come into their decision-making process, which conflicted with the evidence that we believe that they gave to this committee in February of the previous year. So that's where we are, is that after 4 years, we have been refused all our applications on the pretext that we didn't supply sufficient evidence of demand. Now, the evidence of demand that we did supply was extensive. We followed the rules throughout and showed a high patience of goodwill. We supplied, as I said, robust evidence of demand in excess of that could be reasonably expected of any small to medium-sized private operator. We've been through a judicial review, been successful in that, and have been awarded costs. The department has reneged on its terms of settlements of that judicial review. We have seen the dates and goalposts continually shifted through almost 4 years. We have seen conflicting and misleading information provided to statutory stakeholders by the officers of the department, and we are now left in a position where, in Northern Ireland, to get an express service permit that is considered a matter for the Minister, which I would suggest makes us a bit of a laughing stock in the rest of the United Kingdom. We have standard transport economics evidence and advice from one of the UK's leading experts in the field, labelled as insufficient to secure a permit on a vacant route. We have a legislative need in the 2011 Act to ensure fair competition, met with the statement, and I'll quote, "The panel are satisfied that there is no evidence the application would result in unfair competition." So that means their idea of fair competition is making sure that unfair applications are denied. And we have the department whose job it is, as a local authority, to going ahead with a wholly irrational and distorted reinterpretation of the 30-minute rule, which Karen alluded to earlier, which effectively brings the shutters down on any express service permits again. And all of this leads to a reduction in service provision in public transport in Northern Ireland that is unique within the United Kingdom and Ireland. And I would remind the committee that the transport survey from the department's own main reason that people cited that they would not travel is because it takes too long and the journey is quicker. That is the number one reason. And the only way to successfully get people out of their cars is to shorten journey times, to make it comparable to the car, and for inter-urban connectivity, that means express non-stop services of the type that we applied to do. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. we have Niall back. So apologies for that, Niall. We seem to lose you. So if we could just recap.
Yes, yeah, I'm doing my best here to try to stay connected also, but I'll do my best to get through what I want to say, and if not, I would like to be able to submit it to the members. But essentially, I missed what Owen was saying, but I'm sure what I will say will only reiterate his frustrations. I mean, for ourselves, having had 25 years experience in the industry, we now exist under a licence scheme that challenges our position to grow and means that we have to justify our existence on a 3-year basis. Under the new guidelines, the renewal process means that we will be treated as a new applicant and potentially open to all the changes that are listed in the reports we submitted. To put this in context, the financial agreement to purchase a new bus is typically 5 years, and you can imagine the challenges that this will provide when planning fleet rotation over a 3-year period. In total, there are 8 specific guideline changes that essentially turn our industry on our head. These changes not only raise the barriers of entry to the sector, but literally put at risk the existing operations who have created new routes and access across the province. As I mentioned, we've been operating for 25 years and have full intentions of being around for the next 25. But if these changes are not reviewed, we will continue to operate and live with the threat of the permit being withdrawn on a 3-year basis. I think if we look at the last 15 months have been extraordinary for both the government and society as we adjusted our lives through the pandemic. As coach operators, we were the first to be hit, and as business owners faced livelihood challenges with untold stress. Over the past 12 months, Bus and Coach NI has pursued a vigorous lobbying campaign to all walks of life and government. I'm quite sure if you didn't know Karen McGill 18 months ago, then I'm quite sure you'll know her today. It was essential that funding be provided to help the industry, and thankfully support schemes were created. The due diligence process throughout these schemes were certainly frustration to all, but I believe the end results produced a new beginning for our narrative of our sector and our government relations. We have never been more recognised or defined as an industry, both in terms of quality and the services provided across society, and in terms of quantity by defining the physical size of fleet and the social economic benefits to the province. Post-COVID, our sector has many challenges ahead, and the opportunity now is to build on these new relationships between them. We cannot allow the subvention invested in the industry so far to go to waste. It is abundantly clear that there's a huge disconnect between the governing guidelines to the industry and the aspirational vision of where we want to go. As a region, we have ambitious environmental targets for 2050 and a vision of a more carbon neutral society. It is clear Transdev will not be able to do this on its own. The private sector will be required, and the legislation will prohibit this. There is a tragic irony of the current situation. The new guidelines have gone to great length and depth to ensure longer consultation periods and having additional stakeholders to authorise new permits, and yet we were literally presented with a done deal. I am confident and hopeful, though, that we can revisit and shape more appropriate guidelines for future transport ambitions. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. And Eamon has joined us as well. Eamon, at this point, do you have anything to add?
Well, I'm just going to briefly give my perspective of what way we are being treated at the moment. Like Owen and the rest of all operators, we started applying for permits. And now I'm operating a service over 20 years between Belfast and Newry. There was a gap in the market, and we started our service back in 2000. We built it back up to 700 passengers per day pre-COVID. During that period, just pre-COVID, we applied to add more additional services because the numbers were increasing. It took over 2 years for us to add a service on. So we like for Toxic, we had a 5 o'clock service and a 5:30, and we wanted to put a 5:15 in to cope with the numbers. 2 years it took. Again, we had to force the department to a judicial review, and at the dying hour, they sent me a letter to say that they were going to grant me the licence. And lo and behold, in the meantime, TransLink had set services in on top of the service times that I had applied for, which I thought wasn't appropriate. Now, I did raise this at a meeting a couple of months ago, and I was told by the department, that wouldn't happen again. That shouldn't have happened. Blah blah blah. I've now discovered back in October, Translink now have added a 238B, and it is shadowing every one of my services between Belfast and Newry. And to me, it's predatory, and it's been facilitated by the department. And for operators like ourselves to be treated like this, I don't think is appropriate. So that's my opinion on it anyway.
Okay.
And I'm sure Owen and the rest, the operators have been through the same process as I have. It's like getting your teeth pulled.
Okay.
Okay. That's all I have to say, really.
Okay, thank you. Thank all of you for your contributions this morning. As you'll be aware, this is we're going to be returning to this again next week when we have the departmental officials coming to the committee. And members felt that it would be useful to hear from the operators in advance of that, and certainly what you've said this morning is quite worrying, to say the least. Karen, you mentioned that you had a meeting on the 14th of April with officials. Was that in relation to have a discussion around this? What advanced knowledge did you know going into that meeting? Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry. Before the meeting, we were sent a copy of the new draft guidance. That was it. Now, we hadn't met with the department probably for nearly 2 years previous to that. We had met during the meeting referred to by Owen with the Competition Markets Authority and the department. And as I say, we've had other meetings about different PSBAR compliance and whatever, but not about the new guidance or the change to the process.
Okay, so up until the 14th of April, you weren't aware that there were any changes being made to the guidelines at all?
No, they did mention during the meeting with the Competition Markets Authority that they had thought about introducing 2 more steps to the application process. And I raised concerns both there and in writing afterwards and said, how can you do that? All the applications are under the current guidance, and that's where they have to be considered and how they have to be considered. Plus, why are you moving the decision to a panel? And why then, if the panel can't make a decision, does that go to the minister? Because that extends the process. And you're paid within your job description to do your job. You're now saying you're not fit to do that. You're going to move it to a panel. What is the experience of the panel, and who will they be to make these decisions? And then you're telling me then, even at their pay grade, they might not be able to make a decision. So we put that on to the minister, and that is how we're going to develop the network. And where a minister's portfolio is what it is, then we're going to give her the decision to make. So we couldn't understand that, and as I say, we didn't make any agreement, and we opposed it greatly. Opposed it for the very obvious and very sensible reasons. I'd just like to come back to the point that we did not know that the minister had already been presented with a document to ask her to change the process. Now, we have asked for that, and I have had that submitted. And I have gone through that, and I have already responded because the submission to the minister was neither accurate or fair or transparent in terms of the whole process. It didn't mention the opposition from the private sector. It didn't mention our concerns whenever we had the verbal conversation. So the minister was given a set of, facts that weren't all facts. And I believe there was a certain amount of manipulation there, and I don't think the minister could have made another decision based on what she was given. And I think that's where our concerns are coming from. Why the department or the officials or whoever's working has decided that the private sector should not be part of it, and that we should, introduce as many hurdles as we can, because this is about developing the network for the people of Northern Ireland and allowing businesses to do what they do best. So Why is that being made so complicated? Why did a submission go to the Minister which didn't give the facts and didn't represent what the private sector felt? And why then, on this new document, are we being hindered even more? We're not even allowed to be part of the journey planner, even though, as I have submitted in the document which I've submitted to the department, we'd had this discussion with the Department for Infrastructure previously. We'd raised a lot of our concerns. And in February 2019, before Mr McGrath, John McGrath, the then Deputy Permanent Secretary, left, he said that he had brought the team in, he discussed it with TransLink, and he'd asked the team to ensure that the process of applying for access to the journey planner was made available. Now, you would think that the department who owns the public transport provider and the network and everything surrounding that, they would want to develop a network of services for the passengers in Northern Ireland, and where they have at the minute 65 permits, they would want that information to be part of a journey planner so that all the people from the province could actually link in, that we could integrate, we could start the proper process of creating a better network with more flexible services and shortening journey times to get the people out of the car, to get them on to public transport. And that's where we don't understand where this is coming from.
Okay, can I just ask, because obviously this is being regarded as draft guidelines, so I'm just wondering what the status of this is and whether there was any explanation given to you by officials as to the status of it and whether there would be any consultation, and perhaps was that meeting of the 14th part of a consultation process?
It wasn't described as being part of a consultation process. It was just described as going through the new guidance. Now, the official that we have been dealing with obviously had presented that to us. We then met 2 weeks later when we had raised concerns with his superior, who is new to the department, I think last November, Jackie Robinson. And what she had said to us during that meeting is, look, we will meet together, we will consult and we'll look at the guidance. And I had to say to her at that time, well, look, we have already done all that. Stuart's already sent it out. We've already met with him and we've given our concerns. So she agreed at that point that we would need to have a look at it, but we haven't heard from them again, and that was in 4 or 5 weeks ago. So we really haven't heard anything since. I have subsequently written since that meeting about the submission to the Minister and about the new determination that they have asked for from the Department of Solicitors about the 30-minute rule.
Okay.
So we couldn't understand why they needed that, but anyway.
If I could just say, sorry, Chair, I just want to point out that the department has told us that the process has changed without consultation. The consultation is limited to the wording of the guidelines, and that's what they've told us.
Okay, we'll maybe get some clarity from officials in relation to that then next week. Some of the points which you have raised that I suppose become sort of quite clear in the rebuttals that you've made to each point in trying to actually get a permit. And Owen, you've said that the process that you went through previously, you felt that officials frustrated and blocked the application, and obviously the new guidelines would not help any future application, but would perhaps frustrate it even further. And I suppose one of the I suppose the headlines around this would be around proof of demand and evidence of demand. Up until this point, what was it that you needed to present in order to prove the viability of a route?
Okay, well, the process and the legislation just says that we need to provide evidence of demand. Doesn't give any detail. Now, the level of evidence of demand that we went to was very, very extensive. We did a full review of the legislation, the regulations, the guidelines, a review of Programme for Government, the Regional Development Strategy 2013, etc. We did a review of the existing service provision. And it's important to realise that TransLink at that stage did no express routes anywhere in Northern Ireland. There was only one express route anywhere in Northern Ireland, and that was the service operated by Eamon. We got advice from one of the UK's leading experts in the field, a chap called Professor Peter White of, I think, Westminster University. And he helped us with our detailed elasticities of demand model. We also used the NISRA settlement data. We also put that data into a spatial model, again, to try and model potential demand. We did a focus group also on the dairy route, and that was specifically to look at the tourists aspect of it and potential barriers to demand. So the evidence that we produced was robust. It was done to make sure, for us, from a business case point of view, first of all, this was a significant investment, £11 million over 5 years. So it was way in excess of what level could be reasonably expected for a private operator of small to medium size. The important thing as well to realise is the custom, as I said, and the working practice and the implication within it's implicit within the guidelines, that where the service is vacant, it is normally awarded, and it's only really when there's another service of the same type operating on the same route that the evidence of demand really comes into play, as does that 30-minute rule. And I think it's also worth pointing out that, similar to Eamon's experience, and again, we were warned going into this, we predicted how obstructive the department had been previously, could be, and would be. Less than 2 weeks after it settled our judicial review on the Londonderry to Belfast route, the department permitted Translink to operate its first ever express route in Northern Ireland, and that was between Londonderry and Belfast. That was within 2 weeks of its settlement. At the start of the process when it was supposed to be redetermined hours, we only found that out sometime later. And the department and Translink has also put express or direct services on almost every route which we applied to do. The routes that we were told there was no demand for initially.
Okay.
I would also, we part of the plan was we did all the express routes, and we were putting an express service into Scotland. And I must say, the difference between Northern Ireland and Scotland is like chalk and cheese. We are in the Travel Line Scotland website with no problem. All we have to do is supply a timetable and access to the bus station in Glasgow. All we have to do is provide our timetable and pay our on-stance fees, and they couldn't be more helpful.
Okay, thank you. Can I call Cathal Boylan?
Thanks, Sharon, and you're all, once again, you're all welcome back. Terence, good to see you again. And Owen. I just want to clarify some points, obviously, and some questions for Owen as well. But Karen, primarily yourself, Danielle, and Ian first. Say in terms of in your briefing, you've mentioned the 30-minute route and the interpretation of that and how it's changed under the new guidance. So could you give us a wee bit of a better understanding that exactly what impact that has in terms of regular stop and service and express services, on a shared route?
Okay.
And just that point first, the three is like to comment, not there.
Well, okay, I'm maybe late as I would normally do. Look, in the job that I do, when one of my members or an operator comes to me and asks, I was thinking about a service, am I able to apply for it? I should be able to look at the legislation, the suitability of the route, if there's any other people or incumbent operators on it, how the needs of the people will be met, and there's certain criteria, and I can look at that and I should be able to say, yeah, that's fine. The big thing, and the thing that everybody knows, and my child at 3.5 knew it when she was here, was the 30-minute rule. Because where you have a service, where you have 2 stage carriage, or regular stopping as they are now, if you have an existing stage carriage service and somebody else applies for another stage carriage service on the same route, he cannot have it unless there's a 30-minute time difference, okay? Now, if there's that same stage carriage route and an express application comes in, because it's an express service which offers the passenger different service, then that is all. There's no time buffer. There is no 30-minute rule applied where that is, and that's, I think, what Owen is referring to. So that's what you need to look at then, and that obviously everybody needs a 30-minute rule. Where you have express services and you have 2 express services, then you have a 30-minute close or 30-mile closed door element. But that effectively, in simple terms, is that it's a time buffer to provide that protection of the incumbent for a new operator coming on. And I think that's where Owen and Eamon have both referred to, services maybe coming on board for them. So it's a 30-minute time buffer.
Right, okay, no, and I appreciate that. Now the real question, I'll let the other members come in a minute, whoever wants to respond. I take it these changes weren't wanted by the industry, that's one point. I mean, my real point is this here. What do you think the purpose of this change was, or their change in interpretation was? And he'd like to respond in relation to that.
Well, look, I'll just be blunt and I'll be quick here. I think it was to keep the industry out. There was no real need for the change. It was established. It's fair, and I don't understand why they went for a redetermination within the departmental sisters. I think it was to block. I personally do. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't see any other reason for it.
To narrow the name, because I have another point for one, but just to narrow the name for now.
Well, I mean, Cal, if I can explain, as a permit holder for the last 25 years, and as I was explaining, countless miles and passengers, we still now are going into a brand new world where we don't know if we can look past 3 years. They've actually taken a very defined document of guidelines and created a more spurious document that is very difficult to follow and challenge. And so to be living in that type of circumstance, never mind operate a business, employ people, plan for the future, is very difficult. So I struggle to see how the current guidelines would encourage a more interactive and iterative public transport system as we move forward.
Liam, would you like to comment, please?
Yeah, the 30-minute rule was how I operated between Newry and Belfast. When I looked at the setup, again 20 years ago, the TransLink ran a service Newry, Loughbrickland, Banbridge, Dromore, Hillsborough, Sprucefield, Belfast, 2-hour journey. They had no passengers getting on in Newry, and I put a service on, and within a couple of years we were filling our buses. The reason being is that we were running directly from Newry, we had our doors closed in Newry, and we were in the city 50 minutes later. This 30-minute rule, if it's done away with, it'll obliterate me. That's what it's set up to do. It's set up to take us off the road. Once that 30-minute rule comes up, in 3 years' time when I go to look for my permit again, they're going to turn around and say, sure, TransLink are doing it. See you later. Simple as that. It's all set up. They're all been what do you call the dominoes are all been set up for them to fall in a couple of years' time when we reapply for our permits. That's my opinion anyway.
No, and that's fair enough, folks, and that's why I've posed the question. I mean, clearly the questions were coming up, and in terms of yourselves, I mean, if we need any other information, whatever, we'll definitely come back. But Owen, I want to pick up on your point there, and obviously you can comment maybe on the 30-minute rule as well. But this issue of the determination is supposed to take in 6 weeks and took over 2 years, and you've experienced it now over a number of years. I mean, how did the department explain that gross delay in making the determination, or what did they say?
There was really no valid explanation given. There was, in that 6 weeks, which I explained when we had the terms of settlement of the Justice Review, we agreed to an extension to allow TransLink to present to Derry City Council. So that's been the only one. There was a period, again, I think it was an 8-month period of just, they completely ignored us, just didn't do a thing. And that seemed to coincide with the arrival of the new permanent secretary. They just waited for something to come along. They latched on to the, as I say, the Northern Ireland Executive Functions Act. It's really difficult in England, Scotland, Wales, and I believe in the Republic of Ireland. An express service you wouldn't even need a permit for, and in Great Britain you don't even need to register it. It's really laughable here that we have these barriers. These barriers were all stamped out in the rest of the United Kingdom over 40 years ago. And the 30-minute rule, just to be clear on it, what in effect the department are saying here is that if there's any bus at all operating along the route within 30 minutes either side of it. So that gives you an hour window. You can't even operate a different type of service, an express service. And again, we'll go back to Northern Ireland sits out like a saucepan handle. We are the only place in Europe that doesn't have express coach services between urban centres. And it's not just in terms of the fairness of the applications. It's actually hurting transport in Northern Ireland. And it's also stretching transit services and diluting the bus services in Northern Ireland as well. And it's no wonder most of those services are in chronic decline.
So basically what you're saying, or what I'm getting reading from yourself, clearly in terms of the determination, there's no clear clarification, verification or validation in why they took that decision in the delay itself. And also, obviously you feel them in terms of the 30-minute rule, they're moving the goalposts. Do you feel that?
Yeah. I mean, the 30-minute rule is only one of a set of many goalposts. I mean, I think it was last February that the department advised this committee that it would have a significant impact on transit if we were to be awarded these. They quoted, I believe, a figure of £2.2 million. That figure evaporated. So they told us that we weren't denied it because of any impact on transit. It's because we didn't show enough evidence of demand. And I can provide the committee with copies of any of the applications that we put in, and I would challenge anybody to come to the same conclusion that was insufficient evidence of demand, as the department have subsequently come to. So we just get a series of different excuses trotted out at every stage. So it's to prolong it, and it's to come to the same business decision that we have come to, is there is no point in trying to invest in public transport in Northern Ireland. All you will get is pain and loss of time, loss of resources over many years. And if these people are prepared to waste millions in inefficiency left, right and centre, they're not going to care about paying £30,000-40,000 costs for judicial review after judicial review after judicial review. So we've been entirely blocked, and what I would be calling on is for the committee to ask the Competition and Markets Authority to do a formal investigation into how public transport sector is operated within Northern Ireland.
Well, listen, Owen and Karen and Niall and Eamon, thanks very much. I mean, I want to just pick on those points because I know all the members have a lot of different points, and you're right. It's across the board in terms of guidance and interpretation. So there's other members will have different questions. I just want to concentrate on those two. But thank you very much for your responses, and you know, we'll continue to work with you, and obviously we'll have a discussion at the end of this meeting with the committee and the committee chair to see where we want to go forward. But thank you for your answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. And Niall, as you said, Karen has definitely become a old name, I think, among many elected representatives. I didn't know it at all. If Niall has me on speed dial. But, I do want to acknowledge the lobbying that she's done and the sterling work that the sector has done. And I also want to acknowledge the importance, Niall, of Airporter, you know, for Derry in the Northwest. Like I had a constituent 2 days ago that I had to literally get on the Airporter to get to the airport for, you know, quick turnaround, somebody very ill in hospital in England, and just having that service, it's a highly valued and needed service. And I'm actually gobsmacked, you know, that you have to live with a potential withdrawal payment on a daily basis, all of you. And I think how the department expect Airport or any other transport business to effectively operate under such a precarious cloud hanging over you all. I just want to put that on record, that listening to you today, I didn't think I would get any more shocked dealing with yourselves in terms of how you've been treated by the department throughout the COVID pandemic and the issues that we had dealt with, particularly as you had been trying to get access to much needed grant. And then hearing all this today is quite shocking. Can I ask Owen, because when you were recounting the judicial review and the department settling that and then effectively ignoring you for years. Like, are you of the view, like, was it to buy time to put in place a block so that they didn't have to address the issue? Because I can't understand anyone involved in a judicial review with the department settling it. One would expect that the determination that would be made would be then to your satisfaction. So I can't understand the way you have been treated and how the outcome has come about the way it did.
Yeah, and it is shocking. And effectively, what we've got here is a department, I would argue, in contempt of a High Court settlement. I suppose we say broke it into the different periods. Initially, they were asking us for more information. They were asking for advice on, believe it or not, they said there's no process for determining what services should be given priority at publicly funded bus stations. So they were asking us for advice on it. We're supposed to be just not better and not doing that. We happily did it. We happily told them about how we were getting into Google Trans and those sorts of things. So there's an immense amount of information that we passed over, and Karen will have seen much of what we did. So that brought us up to that sort of period where they said, look, will you allow TransLink to present to Derry City Council? Now we were in this for 10 years, and I can be frank now about our business plan. We didn't expect to even break even for the first 2.5 years, and only to turn to pay the debt off after 4 years. So we were in this for 10 to 15 years. We wanted a good relationship with TransLink and the department, because the way that this should work is you plug into the network. They should be able to use TransLink services for first and last mile. And what I mean by that is a bus into Derry Foyle Station, and then get our express down and maybe use the glider up if we're going to Andersonstown, East Belfast, Titanic, etc. So we acceded to that, and we agreed to it. We wanted to show goodwill and give them the benefit of the doubt. But then that period where we were just ignored for 8 months. We had MLAs and MPs or MP writing to the permanent secretary and just ignored. There it sort of became clear that they weren't really interested. There'd been a distinct change of tone. We had this thing about the minister. We tried to argue through being rational about it and reasonable about it. And as well, we should have been one of the best pieces of news for TransLink. They're going into their new service agreement. The legislation actually says they're to be awarded most, which means over half. They're effectively awarded, 90, they're 100%. And there is a reason why they don't do express services, and that's because they don't qualify for all the subsidies that TransLink services do as bus services. So in terms of revenue support, that sort of support, or capital support as well. So we try to be rational with them, try to argue with them, say, look, you don't want to go into a second judicial review. But one of the points that then we had were, because they weren't making a decision, it made it difficult for us to trigger a judicial review. And that was the advice that we were getting from solicitors. So us being accommodating and allowing TransLink had become a problem for us from a legal trigger point of view. And then you go into a minister, you put in so much effort, and you just have to keep going. So we just had to wait until a decision was made, and that decision was communicated to us in March, just before Easter. And honestly, I'd like to submit the paper that we received. The quality of it is incredibly poor. The statement on fair access to public transport is just absolutely contorted. And it's absolutely, I described it in the meeting, Karen was there, asymmetric to the level of information, the quality of data, evidence of demand that we were putting in. Simple message we got back from the department. But in a way, Martina, I think that was part of the message, is that no matter how much effort you put in, we only have to put in a minimal amount of effort to block you. And that's the message we got.
And are you considering opening up another legal avenue? Because it seems to be, from what you have recounted there, that it is in breach of a High Court ruling. That the department would seem to be in breach of a High Court ruling. Is that something that solicitors are exploring?
Well, I think they are in breach. I mean, and we have talked to our solicitors. As I said, we're a transport company. We took the decision to diversify into Northern Ireland. That was a riskier strategy. £11 million investment, 75 jobs. Yes, we could mount a legal challenge, but the outcome of that is probably is to force them to make another redetermination. Again, we were prepared when we went into this for 2 judicial reviews. That's what we expected, but we expected them to be within 2 years. It's not reasonable for us to go forward. I think, for us, we're finished with the process. It's clear we've been blocked. We've been unfairly blocked. And I think it was a message to the wider industry to say, look, if Hannons can't get it with all the resources that they put in, don't even bother asking. And the 30-minute rule that they've changed is just incredible. I'm like, the audacity of doing that. In fact, if you think a bus could go down one route and block an express route on the same, as I say, it works everywhere else in Europe. Express services. It's in the programme for government, rapid intra-urban connectivity. Transport economics of demand show it. And again, what I should have said at the outset is in a former role I worked for Translink. One of the things I did work on was elasticities of demand and stimulating demand and barriers to travel. And Translink know this, but they don't do it because that's not what they're contracted to do. There's no express services within their service agreement. As I say, it really came as a shock to us and to Karen as well, although they did it to Eamon, is each and every single one of the routes we apply for, they put in effect, express services on those routes, even though they have no contract to do so.
Okay, well, I think after listening to you today, I can understand the previous comment about you want, whether it's an inquiry or some way that this can be probed into further, because there's obvious problems there. And Karen, can I ask you in relation to the changes, and you've talked about that a lot, to the permit application process during that meeting in April, when it was confirmed that by the DFI officials that the changes had been made and agreed by the minister. Was there no notification to the sector whatsoever about these changes into the guidance? Is this how the department has done things with you in the past? Is this how they've communicated with you? Or was there something different that happened here for this to be landed on you without any previous notification, if that was the case?
They did mention that they had looked during the meeting that we had when, and I think it was May 19, they did think that they did suggest changing the process. But as I said earlier, we objected and we opposed it for the very obvious reasons. We were never formally advised that this is going to be formally changed, that we are going to the minister to actually change the process. We didn't know that the process was actually changed until the meeting we had a number of weeks ago. So there was no formal communication. There was no formal either verbal or written to say we've changed it, we've included the new steps, we're going to the minister to get her to agree the new determination process, and that we'll get you guidance to reflect all that. Never anything formal at all. Look, I have worked for 20 years with previous, obviously, DRD and now DFI. I have been involved in every single decision or application that we had for either stage carriage or express in the early days and across the years. From Niall, Eamon, I have been involved at every stage. And previously, we've always had a battle. But we always got there, whether it was through lack of experience with officials or ignorance or just fear. We always got there. But recently, it's a totally different ballgame. We don't get there. And we need certainty for our people in terms of their businesses. But officials don't seem to believe that they're accountable anymore. They don't, even in terms of the minutes that we get, the responses that we get. You know, they can prevaricate, they don't always answer, they're not always, direct with us. So I just don't understand whether it's different officials. There's a level of intransigence that I have never seen. In terms of the application with the one, I was involved with it too, part of the way, and in the last couple of years, I have never witnessed anything like it before. The level of information and the proof of demand that one of them put in was way above anything that I have ever seen, even the department producing, and they still were able to deal with things the way that they did. Now, for me, it is
Are
getting
accountable.
TransLink a bad name. It's getting our industry and apart from, as I said last week, I don't understand why we don't have communication with the department. There isn't a formal channel. We don't have anything to do. We can request for the meeting. The permanent secretary, deputy permanent secretary, there is no level there. We deal with the official, standard that's dealing with our thing. That's it. They don't talk to us about carbon neutral. They don't talk to us about anything. We're not seen as an industry. And as I said last week, we're 80% of the size of TransLink. We're over 1,100 vehicles in the fleet. And as I said to my people, well, obviously they're not having to worry about decarbonisation with us. We can just tootle up the road if we like, because nobody takes anything to do with us. We're not part of the transport statistics, even though we're licensed and regulated by the department, and even though just for vehicle licensing and driver licensing, we're £500,000 we pay the department a year for our privilege. But they don't talk to us as an industry. They don't see us as an industry. That's part of the problem, and they do not see the role that we can play and that we need to be playing in terms of the development of the network. Between ourselves and TransLink, we can go forward. The department is the department that owns TransLink, owns the network, and actually owns us as well. The department needs the wherewithal, they need the experience, they need the knowledge to try and look at this sensibly, look at what their programme for government said, look what their priorities and responsibilities are, and think, you know what? We have an asset here, we can work together and we can do this with no fear of anything happening to TransLink, because TransLink have to be there to provide that network of services that the private sector either can't or won't. So,
can I ask just one other question, Chair, just in relation to the journey planner? And I'm just, again, I'm thinking of the airporter in Derry and others, by the way, all of you. And because, that service that, you had said that there were services that were previously included in the journey planner that were removed without any reason. And I'm just trying to probe, why do you think there's reluctance to include the services not offered by TransLink on the journey planner? And again, I say because it's something that we value in Derry, airporter. Surely it's not helpful for businesses or for the public awareness of the extent of the services available if those services are not reflected on journey planners.
Martina, I could perhaps give you some experience of what I've been through. Certainly, I've been trying for several years to get the airporter onto the journey planner. At the contact level and at the managerial level, I'm having great, warm and welcoming consultation. There's a willingness to say, look, we really should get this on board. But as soon as you get into the intricacies of whatever the system is, there seems to be a blockage along the way, and it never seems to come about. And I think either it's, well, the system is too complicated or whatever, but there has been, I go back twice a year just to check, has there been any developments? But if we think about, Martina, how we search and look for transport now, everything is done online. So there should be a more easier and freer way to make this occur, and a more opportunity for the public to get access to it. There's a very easy give that could be handled in terms of, if we can't integrate with the actual journey planner, in the meantime, to have a link that says there are services going to, and then we have a license to do this. We're working within the network. We contribute, we layer on top of what TransLink provide, and we contribute to public transport network. And it's only right that if they have the journey planner, which is a central point for Northern Ireland transport, that you should be offering the opportunity, even if it's just signage, even if it's just like click here, and if you book online, we can look after that. It's exposure for services that are not being seen is the issue. Never mind the other issues of the licensing and things like this. Once you're operational, trying to maintain and gain traction and grow, again, is equally challenging. Now, again, at personnel levels and with director levels, the communication is great within the airporter and TransLink. Is trying to get into and within the infrastructures is the challenging part.
Could I just
Go ahead, Karen.
Sorry, on the application process prior to these new guidance, it actually said once your permit was approved, you would automatically be part of that journey planner. That hasn't happened. I know Eamon was on it for a couple of months and then mysteriously was taken off it. But I do know that there is one from outside in terms of the Scottish CityLink one. So I don't understand what the barriers are, and I don't understand why in the new guidance any reference to the journey planner has completely been taken out. I mean, the officials need to tell us why.
Yeah, we don't understand it either, I'm sure, and it's something that the committee members will pick up. Look, there's lots of other questions, but there's other members, and I just find what you have imparted collectively to us today, I find it shocking that businesses are having to operate in that way, particularly given the operational excellence that I know all of you provide across the north. And I have to say, Niall, particularly at Airporter in Derry, it's really a valued service for the city and beyond. So thanks for that, and thank you, Chair.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Chair.
Ms. Kimmins.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you all. And as I said last week at our meeting, whilst I appreciate the opportunity to engage with you all, it's quite unfortunate that we have to have the amount of meetings that we have with yourselves, Karen, because obviously there are a range of issues in various aspects of this. But look, I suppose just going over some of what has been said, and I mean, I certainly share the sentiment that Martina has shared there. I think you've done sterling work, particularly yourself, Karen, on behalf of the sector. And it's been definitely very beneficial to us to get, sort of drill down into what the issues are. And I don't think that's a big ask what we're talking about. And I mean, I think, you know, what Martina finished there and saying about how operators are having to work, the conditions you're now having to work in. You know, certainly as a past student in Belfast, I know that just how valuable the service that Eamon's company provides from Newry to Belfast, and I think it's quite shocking that they're being treated in the way they are. And I would certainly say that, you know, the service that the private operators can provide should be complementing what TransLink and others are providing. So, I mean, I think there's a range of issues just coming out of that. Just in relation, I suppose, to the permit renewals and how they're now being treated as new applications. I mean, just to get a bit more detail on how that will affect business, like, could that length, because it is going to be a lengthier process, will then that mean that you could be out of permit between renewals, and how would that affect you?
Well, what I will maybe come in and let the others speak, but when we had the meeting with the department and we went through the new guidance, Eamon said himself, if I was to apply for my services again now, I wouldn't get them. Now, the difficulty is there, Owen's application and other applications in the process are now being dealt with under this new guidance. And that's where there are additional barriers, not just the length of time, but where the 30-minute rule is going to seriously affect the applications. So it's just more barriers. Maybe the other people, maybe the other guys want to come in there. Maybe Eamon, you want to go first?
Well, as I said, the 30-minute rule, that was the only reason I was able to operate my service between Belfast and Newry. Mm-hmm. Whenever TransLink now have set up numerous services running at identical times to myself, when it comes to the renewal of my permits, the department can turn around and say, and I would expect them to, that's my gut feeling, it's been set up that whenever my renewal comes up, they're going to say, hang on a second, TransLink are operating them services, I don't need you, and thanks very much, cheerio. End of story.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and that's certainly very concerning. It's particularly when you look at him and the length of time that you've been delivering this service. And I mean, as I said, you know, whilst TransLink can obviously do some of it, they can't do to the same level that you have been able to provide in terms of drop off and pick up points and all of that as well. So I mean, that is certainly very concerning, and it's something I think that we do need to have addressed moving forward, so that you're not finding yourself in that position. In terms of the determination of the applications then, and I know it has also changed considerably with the introduction of a panel, as well as a provision to now choose to refer the application to the Minister to make a decision. I mean, how does that mark up with the previous process? You know, do we know how that panel will be made up? And I know in Owen's dealings with Hannon's, with the department, they did eventually say that they referred the decision to the Minister. And was there any reason given as to why they referred it to the Minister?
Well, yeah, I mean, in order for it to be referred to a minister, and again, they went back to the Northern Ireland Executive Functions Act, you know, it had to be a major decision beyond the competence of or beyond the responsibility of the senior officers. I mean, and I think this clearly wasn't a major decision. It was a day-to-day operational decision of, you know, of officers of the department. It didn't cut across departments. There's no policy implications, nothing. But that's been the pretext of it, leading in to say this is why they might introduce this. So, as far as we could tell, the committee was informed that this may have significant impact on TransLink and ability to provide its services. Again, I would challenge that. Even the 2.2 million figure quoted is less than 1% of turnover. The eventual figure that was quoted to us was, I think, 895,000, which is less than 0.5% of TransLink's turnover. But I think the real barrier is, for me, not the panel, because the panel can just be the same as an individual. It's this bit about the referring to a minister. I mean, it's absurd that a decision on a permit for a vacant service where there's no express services, so you think just indicate how valuable the Eamon service was. We were trying to get that to Coleraine, Newcastle, Enniskillen, Dungannon, Roma, Cookstown. Again, all these places don't even have a direct rail service. We were going to offer a non-stop service or a very limited service with a toilet on board, pre-booking, attacking all the barriers. Effectively the same service that we operate between Belfast and Scotland, which has increased demand there by 19% on that route. I mean, we know that from the figures we've been. So to me, it's the referral to a minister. The reason that we were given was because it was a major decision. Yet what came back was we were denied our permits, not because of any potential impact on TransLink, not because of any policy decisions, but simply we didn't provide any information. So why was it ever passed over to the minister? How can, you know, if that's what they're saying, how could it have ever been passed to the minister?
Yeah. Maybe I could come in here, Liz, too, in terms of that determination process. Obviously, it's controversial, and I think the department is unnecessarily making the decision controversial because they are looking at it from a protective stance instead of a development of the network, and that's, I think, where this is wrong. The panel needs to be, if there is to be a panel, if there's anything controversial, the panel has to be people who understand and know what it is that we're doing. As I understand, it was one of the directors, and it was, I think, the head of the Driver and Vehicle Agency, or the head of testing, I think it was. But again, what they would know in terms of making that decision, I did question, and then giving it to the minister seems to be part of the delay along process. But there's something that we need to highlight here. The Transport Act 2011 was born out of the need to change the system and the need to ensure fair competition and allow the private sector to be part of a process, not to do any damage to TransLink, but to complement them in every way. That's what it was about. Some of the services were to be subcontracted out to the private sector. We were also to have a standalone department that made the decisions on the bus permit application. Now, for some reason, those parts of the Act were never enacted. Neither was the part which would allow grants to be paid to the private sector. Those, for some unknown reason, and one would have to ask that too, why they were not enacted. So in the meantime, you have a department that owns a network and owns TransLink and actually has agreement with them that is making the decisions on other services coming in, and they're treating it not as a complementary thing to their service, but as they're frightened of it, and they're treating it as if it's the enemy coming in, and that whole protection attitude, that has to stop. And we need to see why we don't have the proper standalone department and why things aren't done with the vision and with the absolute concentration and focus on developing the network for the people of Northern Ireland. So, you know, there's a whole lot more the department needs to answer in terms of determinations, where the standalone decision-making department is and why they look fearfully at any applications that go in for permits.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the sense I'm getting, Karen, from listening to you all here and from reading the brief. I mean, it makes no sense when something that has worked so well for so long is now, you know, the barriers that are being put up are just beyond belief. And I think, you know, what really screams out at me as well is that rural connectivity is massive in all of this as well. And I know that TransLink probably don't have the resource to deliver the service that the private operators can do. You know, and I know Owen mentioned even just some of the areas that they're trying to replicate the type of service that Eamon is able to do at this end of the 6 counties. So, you know, it's all of that, and it doesn't make sense to me in my mind why they would make it's been made so difficult. I suppose just my final question, it's come back to just the situation that Hannans have had, and I know in the brief on you stated that it wasn't clear whether the decision to refuse was made by the minister or officials, but I know that since then you have met with the department. Has that been clarified, or are you still not sure where that decision came from?
No, yeah, that was clarified, and it was the minister who made the decision. That's what the department told us at the meeting you had, I think it was sometime in April.
Yeah.
And again, they put words into the minister's mouth that she equates empty seats on a bus service that stops 15 times between Enniskillen and Belfast, comes off the main route twice, has no toilet on board, doesn't want pre-booking. Because there's empty seats in that shows there's no demand for an express that would provide all those things. So, I mean, I don't know how they've got away with doing this, but yes, they confirmed it was the minister that made the decision.
And just as you're saying that, has that assessment been made in the context of COVID, or is this looking at pre-COVID figures?
In what context are this?
In terms of empty seats?
Yeah, no, nothing to do with COVID. There was no implication of COVID. Again, one of the things that we put in was, as part of our evidence of demand, was an analysis of TransLink's goal line timetables. So we compared them from 15 years previous to the time that we were doing the analysis. And what it showed was where there was no degree of contention, i.e. no private operator in, they hadn't changed their timetables one bit. Whereas on the Derry route, because you had Chambers, they increased their route by 66%. They also slashed their fare there by about 50% on the 40 journeys. On Eamon's route, they improved their offering by 66%. And on the Dublin offering, we had 2, maybe 3 other private operators came in. They had more than trebled their service offering. So that's the revealed response to a bit of contention. And indeed, I think it was the Office of Fair Trading appeared before this committee's predecessor to say what you have is an operator who has slumped into a comfortable inertia. The customers that we would attract have no choice. They either drive, don't travel, or go on a bus that stops multiple times along a long journey with no toilet on board. And all the different things that we realised, you know, the different reasons for travel. People going to medical treatments, people with long chronic diseases needed access to the toilet. And it's one of the top questions people ask about our Glasgow service, which again, the longest stretch of it is 80 miles. Do you have a toilet on board? You know, it's so important for people on longer journeys.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. Thank you all, I suppose, for your feedback. I mean, that's certainly been very helpful. Thanks, Chair. That's me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Buchanan.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen and gentlemen, for coming along remotely as it is. Just a couple of quick questions. Karen, you referred to, obviously, the draft guidance back in your letter, the 29th of April. Is your understanding the draft guidance is now the new guidance? So in other words, are the department using the draft guidance as their new guidance?
Yes, they are. And that's what they've used to determine the Hannon application. Yes, they are.
Okay, a couple of other questions then. Operator's licence, what period of time does that run for? So if I apply tomorrow, Karen, for an operator's licence, when do I reapply?
Well, you reapply every year.
Every year, okay.
Every year. Technically, the law says it's a 3-year thing, but because of security and different things over the years, they've never allowed it. So you reapply every year for your operator's licence.
Okay, and then see the permits. So say, for example, you were doing that route, I think it was Owen or Eamon, I think it was Owen, from Londonderry to Belfast, okay? you need a permit for that route. So say it was a 5 o'clock route and you wanted another route at 6, is that another permit?
That's a whole consultation process on your permit.
So if I've got a permit for a Belfast to Londonderry route, okay, and I want to do another time slot, is that another permit or just a different consultation on the same permit?
As part of the application process, you submit one timetable. So you tell them what services that you intend to provide. If you want to add additional services, you do have to then consult with them and ask them. So there was one timetable. I can't remember how many services are there. There's an extensive timetable, 7 days a week. But yeah, it was not on a service run by service run basis.
Niall, how do you deal with your additional times, you and Eamon?
Yeah, we again, our specific service is for Derry, Londonderry to the 2 Belfast airports. We have to reflect the activities that happen at the airport, so therefore we would have a summer timetable and a winter timetable, and even the changing of times between a summer and a winter timetable for putting off services does require a period of reflection and somewhat not a new permit application, but again there's an interrogation as to the reasons why and then go back at it. I think that the frustration element is the pedigree and the history of running the service seems to be put aside in terms of how your expertise on running the service, and then we're being challenged in terms of the new complicated systems being put forward moving with the new guidelines.
Well, my experience was that, as I mentioned before, we wanted to put a 5:15 service on from the Europa to Newry. We already had a 5 o'clock one and a 5:30. The vehicles were overloaded. It took me 2 years to get a slot, a 5:15 slot, 5:15 permit. And that was only passed or only granted because we had a judicial review set up for the following week.
Okay.
And the department then issued a letter to say that they were going to grant that service to me at 5:15. They were happy enough with me to put 2 buses on at 5 o'clock and 2 buses on and a further 2 buses on at 5:30, but they didn't want me running one at 5:15.
And that's all under the one permit as such?
Yeah, that was all. I just had to add that service onto the, that was going to be added onto my service.
So if you wanted to take, and just one final point, if you wanted to take, say for example, the 5 o'clock service away, as in just stop it, do you need to advise them of that, consult them on that, or do you just stop it?
Yes. No, you can't stop it. You have to notify them. I think it's 2 months notice, but that's something we never had to do.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, and thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Muir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for everyone for taking the time to come to us virtually. A lot of my questions have been answered, and I think there will be significant, probably more questions for officials next week. Just one thing for Karen, and maybe she can help us with. The view is that this was a policy change and there wasn't any significant consultation around that. I just want to confirm that is the case with you, because changes are one thing, but not having a full proper consultation around that and the ability to engage is another thing entirely. And there's particularly responsibilities around Section 75 and all the rest of it in terms of doing that. So just be interested if you could say a wee bit more in relation to that.
Okay, the first time that we knew was in a meeting that we had where the Competition and Market Authority came in to the meeting, and we had a meeting there with them and what have you. At that meeting, one of the officials suggested 2 new parts to the determination process, which was the panel and the minister, and we said under no circumstances it didn't make sense, it wasn't needed, whatever. We then have a review meeting. All permit holders meet with Stuart Gilmore every so often. And at another one of our meetings, they made a presentation advising that they were going to the process. And I said, yeah, but we've already objected. There is absolutely no need for that process. And why would you do that? And why would you increase more things? That was purely a presentation. The next thing then we were presented with was the guidance. So in between a presentation and the guidance coming along, the minister had already been involved and made a decision based on a submission where she wasn't told that the industry had objected. That was submission 1078/2020. So, and then we were presented with the guidance as of in March, just recently in March. So in between that time, there was no formal communication, there was no formal consultation. It was merely by way of a presentation. And then, as I say, we got the guidance and presented to us. And in between that time, we were told the Minister had changed the process, and here's the guidance that reflects that. That's it. Nothing formal at all.
Okay. I think lots of other issues have been teased out and fully explained, to be honest, but this is a key issue just in terms of the consultation process, Karen, because if there had been a full way as a committee would have been cited of this, and others would have been cited of this, and had the ability to be able to make a response in relation to that. But the fact that this was just delivered in a presentation and then the guidance then comes out is perhaps the key issue here around this, separate from the actual decision, but the fact that the ability to have that consultation.
Well, I think it is concerning, obviously for you as the committee, but, not to be formally consulted, to be presented with a done deal, to know that the Minister had been presented with not even all the facts, and this is how things seem to be done now, and it is very disappointing. And TransLink name comes up all the time because obviously they're a TransLink provider, but this is what the department are doing. The department have decided this is how they're going to work, and we have had to live with all that. It doesn't make sense whenever we need an opportunity, and we've asked the department for an opportunity to work together ourselves and TransLink to look in the rural areas, to look at services that have been taken off, to look where we can come in with our smaller vehicles and, as Owen said, do the first mile, the last mile and try and marry in. There's a lot of potential there for integration, but not unless your attitude changes, and your vision is for that kind of service. So, we need that within the department, and we need to be properly consulted with, we need to be involved, and we need to be the proper stakeholders that we are.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, and I've been on the record about this in relation to planning, but keeping politicians out of decisions around things sometimes, and particularly regulatory decisions around planning or licenses and stuff like that, I would side on the side that it's probably best that we are kept out of that, and to push the Minister is something I'm slightly uncomfortable with, I think it's best left, as an independent process, around that, and we've seen what happens when that goes the other way. So, I think it's important we've got quite a lot from you from today. It's been an extensive session, and I'm grateful for that. And then obviously next week is when we can ask the officials in relation to this. So, thank you for that, and thank you everyone else. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beggs.
Again, thanks everyone for your evidence. It's clear that the independent coach sector have spotted gaps in provision and developed public transport to meet it. You've been innovative, and you've actually ultimately expanded public transport services by your direct routes that you have introduced. I would share your concern that you're saying about the new guidance. I can certainly see that it will create uncertainty in the industry and potentially difficulty in getting future investment. Now, in terms of TransLink providing direct services, I picked up a comment from Owen there that you indicated that you thought TransLink didn't provide direct service because of subsidies. Can you expand that a little bit more? I'm trying to understand why they have not been meeting the demand and how private operators have provided. So, what's the subsidies?
Okay, sorry, the sound is breaking up a little bit here, but I picked up that the point about just to get a bit of expansion on the subsidies surrounding bus services. So within Northern Ireland, there's a legal definition of what a bus service is, and that goes as far back as the 1966 Finance Act. It determines what subsidies can be awarded, concessionary fares, accessibility, etc., etc. And TransLink within the 67 Act, and then later on through the Road Service Agreement, they've been awarded all bus services and all rail services within Northern Ireland. So there's no express services within the service contract. Now that is likely to have been because they didn't want to operate anything because they didn't qualify for subsidy. For instance, up until March 2015, they could have claimed tens of millions of pounds in fuel duty rebate, but only if they could prove that they were bus services and not express services. So that's why TransLink's network is without express services. They're not contracted to do them, and there's not the full gamut of subsidies available for them, so they've chosen not to do them. They've only got one express service anywhere, or about we applied, and that was in Scotland, operating between Stranraer and Edinburgh on behalf of Scottish CityLink.
Well, it's clear that you and your colleagues have spotted that demand from the public and provided that public transport service, and we have to thank you for that. In terms of the new guidance, what effect will that have on fresh applicants considering introducing new service going forward? Is it meaning that it's an even higher hill to climb and may actually put others off?
Well, in terms of our service, it's not a hill, it's a complete shudder, because they have, and it's the interpretation of this 30-minute rule, which they now apply across different service types, which incidentally their solicitors wrote to our solicitors and informed them that was the CCNI that put forward the new interpretation, and the CCNI disputed that. But it in effect means that we couldn't operate, or we couldn't even apply for, well, you could apply, but you would automatically be turned down for an express service, even if there was no express service, but if there was a bus service operating along that route. In effect, there's nowhere in Northern Ireland where you would put an express service which doesn't have a bus somewhere along the route. So in effect, for us, and for any other operator, there's no chance of applying to operate the network of express services that we apply to do.
What protection is there for the public in this? Does the Consumer Council have a role, and potentially the Monopolies Commission?
They do have a role. Now the Consumer Council, I met with them and briefed them. To be honest, I found them a little bit passive in this. We pointed out that as a Consumer Council, they should be looking at that people who would potentially use public transport aren't even given the choice. So there's not a choice, never mind competition. There's not even a choice for an express service. They've wanted to stay neutral, but my view is, in effect, by staying neutral, it's failing, in my opinion, potential users of public transport in Northern Ireland, the wider public transport network, and consumers.
If I could just come in here too, Mr. Beggs, the Consumer Council are a consultee, and I'd just like to highlight here that they were not consulted on with this new draft guidance at all. They didn't receive even the guidance that we did. I shared it with them and invited them to come along to the meeting to discuss. So they are allowed to make recommendations in terms of the permit applications, but as I say, weren't consulted on at this stage. But I think their role should be, I think it's more passive, even apart from Owen's experience, than it previously used to be, because they used to have hearings, proper hearings, whenever there was an impasse where there was difficult decisions to be made. They had held hearings and stuff. That doesn't seem to be the same activity at all anymore.
Owen, you've mentioned that Hannon Transport have been through a successful judicial review and were awarded costs, but you're then saying that the department simply ignored the settlement of that judicial review. What aspects are they ignoring? Because that's quite serious for a public body to be ignoring a judicial review.
Well, I suppose a couple of different aspects. Firstly, I would say they knew going into that judicial review that there was no minister in place. They made no mention of no minister being in place affecting their ability to make a decision. And they committed to make a fresh redetermination within 6 weeks from 15th of February. And as I said earlier, we did agree to an extension of that, which brought us up to the end of when we went through a couple of variations to the end of June. But that was the last part. They've repeated, funny enough, every single mistake that we pointed out within the judicial review, like not taking account of our scientific evidence of demand, not having expertise in the panel, undue weight to TransLink's evidence. And ironically, the only thing that we pointed out in our judicial review that they did get right was the application to the 30-minute rule. So in that original determination, they confirmed in writing that the 30-minute rule did not apply. Also, they give us, or we had sight through Freedom of Information of advice they'd given similar advice to another operator, and we provided that written evidence to the department as soon as they mooted this new interpretation, shall we say, of the 30-minute rule. But the point where we were left was, because they were simply not making a decision and extending it out, it was difficult for us to get the trigger, having allowed the 6-week period to be extended. There was no trigger for us to press the button on another judicial review. We closed a couple of times, and then there was a slight change, and we had to rethink. But it's been shifted, as we said at the start, shifting goalposts the whole way along, and it's been difficult to pursue that. The other aspect is, as a business, even though we recoup costs, didn't recoup my costs, didn't recoup the full cost of the company, it's expensive. And frankly, we don't need this. We don't need to invest £11 million in Northern Ireland. We're better off opening up in Paris like we did do, or further extending across Europe. And that's what we intend to do. Honestly, we're fed up with the behaviour of the department, and we're finished unless there's something significant that changes. And I think the only thing that will change it is no more judicial reviews. They're happy to go through a series of those and pay costs. It'll only be if the Competition Markets Authority comes in and does a thorough review.
You're all painting a picture of a monopoly situation, and even in terms of gaining access for the journey planner and access to bus stations, which would occur in all other locations. So my understanding is the new bus stations are being developed there's Belfast and the new Londonderry transport hub. Have you been consulted in those new designs so that they will be able to facilitate independent users?
No, we haven't been, but I think that in fairness, there was some consultation. I don't know the detail of it, but what I would say is we applied to get our Glasgow service in, and we asked them, could we get in? It was 6:30 in the morning and 10:30 in the mid-morning. They just told us there was no room. It's just not true. The other thing I would say is, well, how come there's a Laganside bus station just out there doing nothing? Any sort of local authority in England would tear off your right arm to have a facility like that. And in Northern Ireland, it's just left there to go to waste. And it seems more that they added services into Europa to prove that they needed to redevelopment. And I think the Northern Ireland Transport Company was more interested in getting subsidised property development than network changes. But but as well, to say that there is no system to prioritise services in there is crazy. That's what the department are saying. There's no way of prioritising, or they have no criteria to prioritise. So just to give you an example, the most glaring example is those services to Dublin operating curbside, and our Glasgow service operating curbside. Those passengers not even have shelter. Meanwhile, Crumlin Snooker Hall to Belfast gets into the station, Drumbo, Newton Orange, Portaferry, these minor services, which actually would be better off operating curbside because it'd be probably closer to where the passenger want to go, are in. And they're probably in for operational reasons to allow trackers to change or something like that. But it's mismanaged. There's no control over it. There's no criteria, and there's no accountability.
Okay.
Maybe I could just come into Mr. Beggs there in terms of the from our perspective, the Federation's perspective. There was an initial consultation with set questions which we did respond to. We did raise the whole area of additional space, additional stands for, you know, for new services, and even for some facility for coach parking. I know there's a lot of the development for the new hub in Belfast, which has been assigned to a commercial type bias, but we had, and others had, both asked as well about additional stands to allow us in, and also some parking spaces, but no, I don't think anything ever changed on that.
On journey planner, I understand it was developed with public money again, with a subsidy, so I'm trying to understand any logic for not including public transport services within it, other than to maintain a monopoly. Would that be your understanding, why you're not being included?
It would indeed, and I would contrast that with our experience in Scotland. Just to give you a figure on the journey planner, so the TransLink website itself cost £1 million. That did not include the journey planner. The journey planner was a further £870,000. It was directly awarded to the incumbent supplier, and on the incumbent supplier's website, it boasts how it is ideal use for a local public transport authority and can handle up to 40,000 or 4,000 operators, and adding timetables as simple as a few clicks. So there is no reason whatsoever that highly significant public spend does not include our service to Scotland, the airport services, or indeed Eamon Rooney's, which were in but were removed.
Chairperson, I think we have to pursue these issues. We're not providing the best public transport service to the people of Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you. Karen, Niall, Eamon, Owen, can I thank you all for your contribution this morning. As you know, we do have officials coming to brief the committee next week, and you've given us plenty of information for questions, so can I appreciate your time today? Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you very much.
Once again, thank you for the hearing. Thank you. Thanks
Thank you.
everyone for your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Members, are you content that we leave any further commentary in relation to this until next week, whenever officials are with us? If you're content? Okay.
Content.
Okay, thank you. And can I just draw your attention to the time? We need to leave here by 1 o'clock, so we have another briefing. So just was that okay? We're just moving up to the 12 o'clock. Okay. So members are just mindful of that whenever we're having our questions for the next session. So our next briefing, item 9, is from the Department on the review of planning policy and low carbon energy. Again, Hansard will record the briefing. You have a paper at page 114, and we'll welcome via Starleaf Angus Kerr, the Chief Planner and Director of Regional Planning, Joy Hargy, the Principal Planning Officer, and Philip McGowan, again, Principal Planning Officer. You're all very welcome to committee this afternoon. Apologies for the delay. We don't often keep to time, so I suppose it's nearly to be expected. Angus, could I ask you to open with the statement, and members will follow with questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'll attempt to be as quick as I can here, given timings. But look, thank you for the invitation to brief committee members on the regional planning policy review of renewable and low carbon energy. We do very much welcome the opportunity to engage today at this early stage in the review process to hear members' thoughts on this subject area. I propose to briefly set out the wider context and then talk specifically about the review. We would then be very happy to hear any comments and answer any questions. Committee will be aware that Minister Mallon announced the review of strategic planning policy for renewable and low carbon energy on the 21st of April to ensure the Department's planning policy remains up to date, robust and fit for purpose. The Minister took this decision in the context of the climate crisis, the emerging energy strategy and supporting the economy and a green recovery from the pandemic. DFI retains responsibility for regional planning policy and legislation and determining regionally significant development applications, while council is responsible for preparing local development plans for their areas and for determining the majority of planning applications. This follows the decision to reform and transfer planning in 2015. The planning system provides a balanced framework for furthering sustainable development in the long-term public interest through integration and balancing of complex social, economic and environmental factors when place-making and decision-taking. The planning system has played an important role in helping to achieve and exceed the 40% target for electricity consumed being generated from indigenous renewable sources by 2020. Figures indicate that for the 12-month period, January to December 2020, 49.2% of total electricity consumption was generated from renewable sources located in Northern Ireland. Onshore wind is the greatest contributor, with 84.9% of that generated from renewable sources being from wind. Other forms of renewable development in the region include solar, biomass, hydro and geothermal. The latest annual planning statistics for 1920 indicate a high approval rate of 88% for renewable energy applications, indicating that the system is continuing to help to facilitate appropriate renewable energy development in suitable locations across the north. The Strategic Planning Policy Statement, published 2015, provides the regional planning policy framework for a wide range of planning matters, including renewable energy. And the current aim of the renewable energy policy is to facilitate the siting of renewable energy generating facilities in appropriate locations within the built and natural environment in order to achieve Northern Ireland's renewable energy targets and to realise the benefits of renewable energy without compromising other environmental assets of acknowledged importance. Planning Policy Statement 18, PPS 18, renewable energy, is also still relevant under the transitional arrangements of the SPPS. However, it will cease to have effect in a council area once the council adopts its new plan strategy. This review of strategic planning policy for renewable and low carbon energy is being undertaken in the context of the climate crisis. DFI is also engaged in work currently being undertaken by the Department for Economy in bringing forward the new energy strategy, with officials contributing to 2 of the 5 thematic working groups, namely power and transport. The policy options for a new energy strategy are currently out to public consultation, as members will be aware, and with a closing date of the 30th of June. It is accepted that there are mixed opinions on the appropriateness of the current strategic planning policy, and that very often it is the submission of a planning application for renewable energy development where conflict first arises. Whilst in a strategic sense there is evidence that the majority of people support the need for green, renewable electricity generation to combat climate change, at the local level opposition can arise to specific projects and proposals. Issues which tend to attract most interest include the location of developments, visual amenity impacts, residential amenity impacts, and local environmental impacts. The scope and content of the review is still subject to development and refinement. However, it is likely to consider matters such as the relationship between planning and the use of renewable energy targets, the need for a spatial approach to site selection, noise issues, shadow flicker, separation distances, the need for decommissioning bonds, emerging renewable energy technologies such as energy storage, co-location and repowering. A key challenge will be to facilitate renewable and low carbon energy development which is acceptable to our communities and also protects the environment, furthering sustainable development in the long-term public interest. As regards local planning policy on this matter, members will also be aware that 11 councils are currently at various stages of preparing their new local development plans. The purpose of each council's local development plan is to set out the council's approach for land use planning matters, with bespoke policies in place to address local circumstances for each plan area, including climate change and renewable energy development. Each council's local development plan will be comprised of 2 documents, the plan strategy and the local policies plan. Both documents will be tested for soundness at an independent examination. This will include a consideration as to whether or not the local development plan has taken into account policy and guidance issued by DFI, including the Regional Development Strategy and the SPPS. This is a legislative requirement. Any amendment to SPPS policy as a result of the review we're talking about today will have to be taken into account by councils in the preparation or review of their local development plan as appropriate. In bringing forward their local development plans, councils will have flexibility to produce detailed operational planning policies tailored to their specific local, social, environmental and economic circumstances. However, where a council deviates from the SPPS, they must ensure that they have robust evidence to show reasoned justification for such a departure, as this will be examined at the independent examination. So the planning policy review process will be taken forward as soon as possible in line with ministerial priorities and in accordance with established policy making best practice, including this early engagement with yourselves in the Infrastructure Committee. As a first step, a detailed policy development process will be developed that takes account of the engagement with the committee, the emerging energy strategy, the previous renewable energy planning policy call for evidence, the independent consultant's report that was commissioned, and wider research. An iterative strategic environmental assessment will also be undertaken alongside the policy development, as is best practice. It is envisaged that there will be a period of policy research, evidence gathering and engagement with a wide range of key stakeholders over the summer and into the autumn. Officials will of course engage again with the committee on the emerging draft policy prior to any public consultation. The Minister intends to publish a draft renewable and low carbon energy planning policy for full public consultation by March 2022 alongside a strategic environmental assessment report. It's also expected that any policy arising from the review will be referred to the Executive prior to final form. So as I've said, we are at the early stages of this, and we're very happy to listen to any comments or views members may wish to raise on the way forward for the review, and indeed answer any questions members may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Angus. And as you've indicated, this is very sort of early in the process, and the Minister does intend to publish for consultation by March 2022. Given the amount of work and I suppose the other work that's been carried out in the Department of the Economy, do you see that as a realistic target or an ambitious one?
I see it as a realistic target. Years of experience of taking forward these policy development processes teaches me that that is an appropriate period of time, if you like, for us to get to the public consultation draft. You can never say never. Sometimes things do crop up in policy development processes, and you're quite right. Obviously the energy strategy is an important aspect of this. We want to feed into that, and there are other areas as well at the moment. Sony are doing a consultation at the minute on their plans, and so are NIE, and all of those are relevant to factor in to this sort of complex policy area.
Okay, and you've stated in the document the issues around PPS 18 renewable energy, in that it's still relevant under the transitional arrangements of the SPSS. However, it will cease to have effect in a council area once that council adopts its new plan strategy of its local development plan. Are we at any risk of the councils getting to that stage before your piece of work is concluded? And what would be the outworkings of that if that were to be the case?
Yeah, we are at risk of that, because the plans are moving forward at pace across all the council areas. So this is always an issue when central government brings out new policy of any kind. Really, the task for the council in terms of their local development plans is to take account of it. And so if it comes out at a certain point in time, and the councils hasn't submitted their plan, that's easy enough. They can take that into account. Equally, if a plan has gone through independent examination and it is adopted, it's then really taken into account in the future through a review. Although the policy itself would still have weight and read alongside the plan. So it's quite a sort of an established process, if you like, in a two-tier planning system where central government brings out policies, and then councils need to take that into account depending on the place they are in their plan process. And of course, as you know, we engage quite closely with the heads of planning and the council planning departments, so we let them know well in advance of when particular planning policy is going to come out.
Okay, and just how closely will you be working with DAERA and in particular NIEA in relation to this?
Yeah, we will be engaging across government, all government departments on this, particularly DAERA and DFE, obviously, in relation to the energy strategy. But we will be engaging with them, and we still have to finalise our sort of stakeholder engagement plan. But part of that will be, meetings with officials from other departments.
Okay, I suppose conscious of the fact that there's statutory consultation in so much of this anyway. I was just being mindful of that. That's all I have at this point. Thank you. Mr. Muir?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Angus and his colleagues for coming along. I think this review is very important. It's key part of, we've declared a climate emergency at the beginning of last year, and it's key that we're able to have a planning system that can help us deliver the changes that are required. There's various documents from different stakeholders around this. One's from NE Networks, and it's clear that in their document they said it must be recognised that the planning process and associated risks of legal challenge and delay represent a major challenge for the delivery of what is their ambitious 2020 renewables target. So this is key. Also, we do have a planning system that's been in place since 2015, a new planning system. There was a lot of work done in the run-up to that. So from my perspective, that's now firmly in place. And we need to be looking forward in terms of reform and change around that, because this 2015 is quite a long time away. In your presentation or your opening comments, Angus, you outlined really the achievements to date in relation to renewables. I have a concern that we've got a real danger of being able to continue those achievements in the time ahead, particularly, and there's a couple of questions really for yourself, particularly in relation to how some district councils are pursuing the process themselves. Aware of one, which is designating areas of constraint, high structures and obstructive development. Now, I know that in response, you'll outline that the council must take account of relevant issues. I'd just be interested from your perspective, if you believe that is sufficient in terms of dealing with these potentially regressive developments, which are going to inhibit Northern Ireland's response to the climate emergency, or do you feel that power from the department will be sufficient to intervene and stop some of these developments that district councils are embarking upon?
Well, I suppose you're quite right. I mean, fundamentally, councils are required to take account of the policy that's in the SPPS, and if they're going to deviate from that policy, which at the moment is very clearly is about facilitating renewable energy development in appropriate locations where it doesn't damage residential environmental amenity. If they're deviating from that in terms of the policies they put through, then they need to have evidence, demonstrating why they think that's necessary and why that's needed, and that will be examined fully by the Planning Appeals Commission at the independent examination. We have a team here that liaises with all of the local council plans teams and throughout the process, and are feeding in to them along those lines, reiterating that consistently. And I know on the renewable energy front, they've been making that particularly clear to councils and indeed on other areas as well, where there could be issues in relation to to alignment with regional policy in the SPPS and indeed the regional development strategy. So I think there is an element of this where let's wait and see how this goes through the Planning Appeals Commission. The executive decided to transfer planning to local councils for a very important reason at that time, because it was considered important that councils should be responsible at the local level for local planning. And so, there's always going to be circumstances where a particular council is sort of saying, there's an issue for us in this particular locality. We're going to bring forward a planning policy that specifically addresses that, and provided they have the evidence that that's needed, that will be carefully examined through the independent examination.
Yeah, like you, Angus, I think you'll be aware that this is a key concern in relation to how district councils are embarking upon this, and it'll be a test of the department in terms of how they respond to that. And I think, whilst I was very clear in terms of welcoming this review, this has to be a review which delivers positive outcomes, and I'm very keen that delivers those relatively quickly, because the real danger is the longer this review goes on, the more uncertainty there is for investors to help us achieve our targets in Northern Ireland in terms of net zero. And there's a real worry that this could end up being an elongated process, which will then deter investment and also will change the goalposts. So if you're midway through a planning application, which takes a significant period of time and money, the worry is that the outcome of this review will then change the goalposts for that application. Now, if that's the case at the moment, if you're midway through an application, if you're considering an application, then the worry will be, well, we'll just hold off until this is completed. And, you know, the developers and investors are also approaching this in the context of the decision which was made in relation to battery energy storage and how that was done. And I just want to see if there's any lessons learned around how that was embarked upon. I understand the rationale behind that, and with, you know, there's been IQs and that and all the rest of it. But, you know, really get your view really in terms of any lessons learned around that battery energy storage and any ability to give some more clarity and certainty in terms of timescales and the potential for this review then to change the goalposts in terms of applications.
Okay, well, I mean, there's a couple of things there. I mean, I think firstly, taking the kind of uncertainty point, there's always an issue when you change policy. It does create a certain amount of uncertainty, but in terms of the planning system, this is common. Policies change over time. Until they change, the existing planning policy is still in play, and it's a policy that will be used. And whilst, yes, we're agreeing that the world is changing and we need to review this policy, and there's lots of things going on as we've discussed, nevertheless, as I tried to illustrate, in the comments earlier on, it's still a policy which is delivering renewable energy on the ground. So, current applications will be gone through and assessed in that way. In terms of the sort of the battery energy storage situation, and lessons learned, if you like, around that, that wasn't a change of policy, so it didn't require public consultation. This, however, as we've been discussing, is very different, and it is a change of policy, and there will be extensive public and stakeholder engagement throughout the process. Indeed, the public consultation drafts will be published. So, I think I'm not sure about lessons learned, because the Department of the Minister is very committed to proper engagement around planning, and we spend a lot of time doing that. Indeed, we're working at the moment on a planning engagement partnership that actually looks at that very issue across the whole planning system, not just for renewable energy.
Yeah, just in terms of timescales for this review, is there any possibility that, I think it's very key that there's that consultation which you've outlined, is there any possibility that the timescales for this can be quickened up? Because not only for the issues I've just outlined, but also the climate emergency and climate change isn't going to stop for any consultation and policy change. We do need to respond pretty swiftly to that and to the concerns that are coming through. And if is there any possibility in terms of ensuring that this review is done on a quicker pace?
Well, look, I mean, we're constantly looking at the program, constantly refining it, and the difficulty with this one is that it's a very complex area, and there does need to be that level of engagement. It overlaps into the DFE's energy strategy, and that's very important. We need to make sure that the policy that's coming out of planning is fit for purpose for what's coming out of the energy strategy, and indeed vice versa. So there's a lot of complexities in there, and there's a lot of moving parts. You've got Sony's work at the moment out for consultation, NIE's out for consultation as well. Those are the issues which are in play. Nevertheless, we do continually look at the programme. I'm conscious of the importance of this, and if it's possible to fast track it, we will.
Yeah, probably just in closing, I do appreciate all the work's done around this, and this is very complex and it's very legal, so I'm conscious of that. And but we do need to move things apace. I was disappointed at the pace in terms of the review of the 2011 Planning Act and how that got off the ground. And now I'm looking forward to hearing the initial outcomes from that later on this month. But we do need to move at a faster pace in relation to these things, because the Assembly is currently debating a climate change bill, and the debate around that is for another place, really, to be honest. But I'm very conscious that the targets, whether it's in that bill or any other bill, are extremely stretching, and the energy is a key way to deliver upon that, and any delays around that are going to inhibit us in terms of meeting those those targets. So very much welcome the review, but it's key that we move forward, and that engagement with district councils and the process that they're taking as well is really, really key. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just go straight into the commentary, because in your notes you state that the latest annual planning statistic indicate an approval rate of 88% for renewable energy applications. Now, whilst that's welcome, I'm sure the length of those planning applications wouldn't be so approving. So, and as you know, the average processing time for major applications across all of the councils is almost double that, double the 30-week target. And the projects relating to renewable energies are certainly no exemption. So whilst the issue of the length of application is harmful to the industry, there may be a further harm, I think, in terms of our decarbonisation efforts. So will this review be looking at that particular issue of delays in the planning system?
Well, I suppose actually it's more, this is really a policy review, so it's the policy for whether or not you approve or refuse planning applications for renewable energy. The work that we're doing, which we'll be coming to talk to you about in a couple of weeks actually, on the review of the Act and on the planning forum work as well, which is focusing on statutory consultation for major planning applications. We're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks' time, and that's really looking at the trying to speed up the planning system. It's looking at more, not the policy stuff, but almost like procedures, the way planning applications are processed, how we can change the system and improve it so that they work more effectively. And I mean, there's been quite a lot of work done, I suppose, around all of that. I mean, maybe not the time to go into it in huge detail because we'll come back to it, but we've the review of the Act, we've the planning forum, we've updating the IT system, which is coming in next year. There's a lot of work going on that. We're also mentioned doing some work around improving community engagement. So there's a whole lot of things going on at the moment that are focused really on trying to speed up planning. This review is more focused on, what's the right policy for, deciding applications on wind farms and wind turbines and solar farms and so on, and what conditions should be put on approvals and that sort of thing. I mean, so it's sort of two sides to it, if you like.
Okay, sure, you can come back to some of that then in a few weeks. You also said that this review of planning is picking up on what Andrea was talking about in renewables and low carbon energy is being undertaken in the context of the climate crisis. However, you're aiming for a public consultation exercise by March 2022, and that's a year from now. And considering the urgency of this climate crisis and the work that's going on in the chamber and the assembly, and all the parties are most supporting it, and the need for a planning system to be up to scratch. Should this review had either been announced earlier, or is there any way that consultation process can be accelerated so it's before March 2022?
Well, I mean, as I said to the previous question, we are constantly looking at ways of trying to speed up the process, and we'll continue to do that. We haven't actually agreed with the Minister yet the kind of programme of engagement, how we'll do that. And you're always in planning balancing the need for really deep and good, meaningful engagement in these processes against speed. It's a kind of a common planning thing, and you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Sometimes we're being criticised for being too slow, other times there's criticism for not properly engaging, if you go back to the BES example. But so we're going to try and get that balance right. One of the big issues with this one is the interrelationships with the other parallel pieces of work that are going on. So you're in some respects you need to make sure that you're taking proper account of those. And the other thing as well about this is it's actually a really complex policy area. What we're doing is looking at new technologies, new renewable energy technologies that are coming forward, which, to be honest, we need to do a bit of learning and building up our sort of knowledge of in terms of, storage technologies, the sort of repowering debate and changes as well in terms of noise, shadow flicker, all those different issues that you have with wind. So there is quite a lot of complex sort of technical knowledge that we need to sort of update and engage around with this one, as opposed to some of our planning policies are a wee bit more straightforward. This one's probably one of the more technical ones.
Okay, Chair, I'm conscious of time and other members coming in. Angus, thanks for those responses, and thank you, Chair, for letting me in.
Thank you, Mr. Boylan.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And Angus, you and your team are very welcome. Angus, I have to say, just in light of the past commentary from the last two members, I mean, we're looking at an energy strategy in DE, we're looking at a private members' climate change bill, we're looking at work at DERA, and, you know, we're looking at the targets we're supposed to set by 2030 in terms of zero carbon targets. So, and I know some of those things are going to be addressed in some of those pieces of legislation, but clearly we need to look at, there's no point in us looking at the PPS without, you know, it will play a major role in reaching those targets or setting those targets, sorry. So just follow on some of the members already mentioned. That's something that seriously, I mean, we need to go back to the Minister with, to be honest with you. I think it's something we need to look at. So I'll leave it at that, but obviously there's enough commentary around it, and I think the one key element I would say is that you know, the early engagement with the sector itself is going to play a big part for you in moving that forward as well, and on all those relevant stakeholders who need to be part of it need to be engaged with it as early as possible. And I would certainly support the call to move that piece of work on. And I know you said 2022, but I think we cannot pass the stuff at the end of this mandate and then a separate piece of work sitting outside of it, you know. So it's all incorporated in all of it, I think, in setting those targets. Just round to the plan review itself, just a couple of points. See, in terms of the review will it impact on the local development plans in any way, or any feedback you've got from the responses so far? How that it may not impact on it, or what responses have you got back in terms of the LDPs and the actual plan review itself?
Do you mean the review of this policy?
Yeah. Well, even the review of this policy, but also in general commentary come from councils in relation to how the plan and policy has been working and how the act has worked. Just generally overall, is there any impact on you?
No, absolutely. There will be impact because whenever the new policy is reviewed and comes out, then it will need to be taken into account by the local development plan. So, you know, if the new policy, I mean, going back to some of the comments made earlier about councils and to the extent to which they align with regional policy, you know, if this new policy, you know, sets out very strong policy directions the councils must follow, then that's something that they will need to take into account as they bring forward their local development plans, or indeed as they review their local development plans. So there will be a big impact on this. And, you know, I think that's one of the issues that we'll be looking at very carefully over the next number of months, just as plans begin to go through independent examinations to see how the Planning Appeals Commission react to some of the policies that they have in their plans about renewable energy. And that will impact, I think, on what we decide to do in this new policy when it comes forward.
So, see, in terms of, I'd say the other parts of the review, say the likes of the LDPs designate, say, 10,000 new units over the next 10 years, whatever the period in terms of housing development. And one, you know sewers infrastructure, you know water infrastructure. I mean, has there been any commentary from councils in relation to that? Or will that form any part of the review, or will we be learning anything from that? Because there's no point in the LDP saying we need 14,000 units right across the borough or whatever it is. And then one, you have the infrastructure, two, there's obstacles in your way. And I mean, obviously those growth data that's out there, I mean, clearly has any of that come up and as part of the review itself, or any commentary in relation to that?
Well, that's not specifically on this review of policy for renewable energy, but I mean, it has that. Those are the sorts of issues that have come up a lot from councils recently, and, you know, kind of on the wider aspects of planning, particularly around, you know, the water and sewage infrastructure issues and so on. So there's a lot of liaison between the council plan teams and, you know, water and DERA and so on in relation to how that's handled. Where there are problems, that is worked through the local development plan process. So, for example, it's possible that if there's an issue with the sewage treatment works and it's not going to come in, not going to be upgraded for a certain period of time, then that will impact on the phasing of housing that that local development plans would bring forward. It may say that the other side of the town is going to be kind of in the first phase, whereas the area that's feeding into the sewage treatment works that needs to be upgraded will have to hold back until that work is commenced. So things like that can be dealt with effectively through the local development plan, as long as there's good cooperation and collaboration between the local government planners and central government.
Well, listen, just my final point, because I know, and you mentioned wind farms and energy in general. Obviously wind farms, some of the applications are taking a long period of time, maybe 3 to 4 years. The issue, we know that, and they understand all the fors and against and all that, because and it was a setting council or setting any application, we're well aware of it. But if we are serious, we need to look at tying all the energy strategy, the review of the PPS, the plan and review that's coming now, and all those things together. Whatever DAERA is bringing forward legislation, and obviously the private members bill in terms of climate change, or a climate change bill. So we need to try and tie all that in realistically. Now I know the time frames are tight, but there's no point in, like I said, us racing to March to bring in legislation without that homework being done, to be honest with you, or 90% of it. So I would encourage that in terms of the energy programmes, in terms of the wind farms, and if we're serious with set targets for 2030,
I totally agree, yeah.
Okay. Sure, that's all my commentary. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming to the committee.
Okay, thank you. Ms Kimmins?
Thanks, Tara, and thank you, Angus, and the team there for today's presentation. I'll try and keep it brief as well. Just in relation to the review, you say that the scope and the content of it is still subject to development and refining, but it is likely to consider the relationship between planning and the use of renewable energy targets, as others have said. Are you able to elaborate a wee bit more on that, as I think it is vital that our planning system is up to the task? Is the current planning system, do you think it is contributing positively to our efforts to decarbonise?
Yeah, well, I think the evidence is there that the planning system has facilitated the great strides we've made, in Northern Ireland in terms of actually achieving those targets. And I'm not saying it's the planning system that has delivered that alone. Obviously, there's been a huge policy kind of approach behind that over the years in terms of subsidies and all sorts of things in an arrow. But certainly, I think the system has actually enabled that to come into effect. So, and that will be an issue. There's no doubt with the new policy. You're quite right. We'll need to see what emerges from the consultation on the energy strategy. What is the target going to be? And then whatever that target is, what are the implications for that for planning and the way planning works, both from the point of view of local development plans and planning decisions as they go forward.
Yeah, no, that's grand. You also stated that where a council deviates from the strategic planning policy statement, that they must have robust evidence to show, why that is. How much room do they have to deviate? And is this ability also in review?
I suppose that's $1 million question at the minute. The legislature, they're required to take account of the policies in the SPPS and the regional development strategy, and we, as I said, liaise very closely with them as they are coming forward with their plans, and we're providing feedback to them about, have you properly covered this policy or that policy and so on, and make sure that you're aware of that. But ultimately, back to the whole purpose of transferring planning to local councils, that the reason we did that was to give the local councils the power and the opportunity to be able to reflect what their constituents want for their local area within the context of taking account of the regional policy. So there's, like any two-tier planning system, there's always that sort of play-off between what central government might want and then what a particular local council may want to do because of particular socio-economic or environmental factors within their area, and how that plays out will be one of the things we're all watching very closely in the new system. Belfast has already gone through their plan independent examination, and we have a couple of other plans now coming down the track as well, who've been referred to the PAC. So we'll be watching that closely and seeing where that goes. And as I said, that's something we will, I think, be looking at in terms of what we say in the new plan, the new policy when we review it, about how what policy should be put in plans, if you like.
Yeah, and I mean, just to suppose on that, from my experience being in council, when the transfer happened, you can see how it can work in every way. Obviously, where councillors are looking at a decision to approve something, and then the council legal team comes out and tries to explain, so I can understand it from I suppose all perspectives, because then obviously we're under pressure as elected reps from the constituents and the applicants and all of that. So I suppose there has to be a balance struck. The last point, just Angus, is just in relation to this review. I mean, how will it tie in with the other ongoing reviews, such as the planning review and the energy strategy? I mean, I suppose just my concern would be that I would hope that it won't, the earlier reviews won't have to wait for this to finish in order for other actions to be taken, depending on the outcome of those.
Yeah, no, as I was saying earlier, I mean, I suppose there's two different types of reviews that we're doing in planning at the minute. One is the stuff that we're doing on the review of the Planning Act, which is much more procedural. This review is really on planning policy, and they're interrelated, obviously, but one doesn't have to wait on the other. So that they can both go ahead in their own tracks, if you like.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. No, thank you. I mean, that's all from me, Chair. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Mr. Beggs.
Okay, thank you. In terms of new technology that you think that this new policy will be required to cover, obviously there's been in the headlines this past year the battery storage issue. Going forward, there will also be hydrogen storage, and planning policy has to get the balance between protecting the environment and yet enabling essential services to be developed where needed. So I hope that you will get that balance. Looking at other aspects of renewable energy that hasn't been delivered here, I'm just curious as to whether you have assessed whether it is anything to do with our planning policy or not. I'm thinking in terms of we have not developed offshore wind, so I don't know if it will be covered by this. Also, I understand there's potential for geothermal energy here. So might there be barriers in our planning system, or how can we enable that to happen with minimum amount of bureaucracy, yet protecting the environment? Other key aspects going forward, it's quite apparent that there will be need for heat pumps, probably air source heat pumps in more urban areas, ground source in more rural areas. Again, I would say, is there a need for a planning application for a ground source heat pump if you're digging up your garden and burying pipes? So I hope you'll assess where there is a genuine need for it. Air source heat pumps, clearly there could be environmental noise pollution, aesthetics in terms of equipment being bolted onto the side of houses, etc. But yet, I think it is important to enable what we know will be needed to occur, and yet minimise the amount of bureaucracy that will be required, or people will just continue to use their oil boilers. Looking at the policy, planning policy, and all of this, I take it that you will also be looking at the different landscape we have at the moment in terms of the ROCs, with ROCs not being available for new turbines, wind turbines, and other renewable. My understanding is that in terms of wind, that means the multiple standalone 250 kilowatt turbine are not economically viable, and it is larger turbines that are being driven by just the economics realities of having no subsidies. So that being the case, I would assume that there are limited opportunities in Northern Ireland where they can be sited. So if we are going to achieve zero carbon, those limited opportunities will need to be available. So how do you build that into the policy? So I've given a few pointers and questions there. Just how reaching is this new policy that you're developing? Will it cover these areas?
Yeah, there are a few good points there. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There's emerging technology in renewable energy, geothermal, battery, energy storage, the sort of the some of the other technologies which are coming through, and I think the answer to that is that we will have to take those into account and make sure that we have a planning policy framework in place to deal with those, which to some extent isn't there at the current policy and will be there once we review this policy. But I think some of the issues that you've raised as well in relation to your single turbines and subsidies and that sort of thing. That's why the link to the energy strategy is so important, because it will depend what emerges from that energy strategy as to what will begin to be developed on the ground across Northern Ireland, and therefore the planning framework needs to be ready for that. In some ways, in the past, there was a disconnect there. When subsidies came in, there was a tsunami really of single turbines across Northern Ireland, which actually the planning system wasn't particularly well geared up to deal with. This time, there's really close engagement between ourselves and Department for Economy, and so we're very much kind of aware of what's coming out of that, and we're also factoring in some of the issues that we have, if you like, from a planning perspective. And I think you've touched on some of those, and really one of the really key ones for us is that whilst everyone is probably able to sign up in principle and theory to renewable energy being a good thing and hitting targets and so on, and climate change issues, but it's only actually whenever the planning application comes in around the corner from where you live, or the plan comes out which is saying we're going to be putting renewable energy development in this particular area or that particular area, that it all comes home to roost. So we're encouraging as much engagement around the wider energy strategy, which I think will help us with our planning policy. So there is that sort of public acceptance. I want to say public acceptance, I don't just mean the public, I also mean local elected representatives and councils who actually understand that if on the one hand they're signing up to some of this policy approach in terms of renewable energy, then that's going to have knock-ons in terms of what comes forward either in their plans and for decision making at that sort of local level. And we're also having an opportunity through this close engagement to feed in from our point of view, if you like, from the planning point of view, which technologies are probably better. You mentioned, offshore. That would come into the marine licensing regime, which is actually DERA, but in many ways, there are a lot of, if you like, planning advantages to that, because as you will be aware, we live in a kind of a region that's, very sort of dispersed in terms of its settlement pattern, and so it's difficult to find sites that don't have an impact, for local communities. Whereas if it's offshore, there probably are less planning issues. So those are the types of things that we're able to factor in. But there's a lot of complexities. There's a lot of things that we need to take account of as we begin to develop this policy moving forward.
The other aspect of going forward with renewable energy, and probably, as I've indicated, larger turbines based on the economics of it, whether onshore or offshore, is the grid infrastructure. And the current system has been very problematic and taking an immense amount of time to adapt the grid to meet that requirement. So are you looking at the planning policies around the development of the grid, which will be vital for the delivery of renewable energy going forward?
Well, I mean, that's definitely an issue that we would be considering, if you like, when we're bringing forward this particular policy. There are existing policies, if you like, that cover, major infrastructure development and so on, which are in place and at the moment facilitate that type of development. But I think we want to make sure that there isn't that sort of disconnect as we had in the past. We're quite often, renewable energy schemes were coming forward, actually even coming in planning applications, clogging up the planning system, but in reality they didn't have any, they may get planning permission, but they actually couldn't get permission to connect to the grid. So those are all issues that are being looked at, both from the DFE perspective in terms of energy strategy, but also from our perspective in terms of this policy. Absolutely.
I do want to pursue the issue of the grid infrastructure. The North-South Interconnector, how many years was it in gestation? I think probably 10 years ago I was on the Environment Committee and it was still being talked about and it's still not built. Now, if Northern Ireland has ambitious plans to hit zero carbon for 2045 or for even 2050 is still quite a challenge. You will not be able to achieve that if there is such lengthy delays in putting in the essential grid network. So just say there may be a need to look at that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Angus, Joy, Philip, can I thank you very much for your time this afternoon? And no doubt we'll be receiving some updates in relation to the progress of this over the coming weeks. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, members, moving then to item 10, which is our forward work programme. Just draw your attention to that at page 120. Members content? Okay. Moving then to any other business. Does anyone have anything they wish to raise at this point? Mr. Boylan?
Just one thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, may I come in? Yeah. Chair, could we write the Minister in relation to the half-fare concessionary passes? See, just could we update on that to see where it's at? Yeah.
Okay.
I'll send on the email to.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Staff, is that okay? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else at this point? Miss Kelly, did you have something earlier?
Thanks, Chair. It's just, if you recall, the update on the contracts, the legal challenge. Yes. Do you remember we hadn't got the briefing yet? We're having it in our forward work plan. So I just wanted to raise that. Obviously, people are very concerned. Contractors are very concerned at the delays it's having to their work programme and the overall schedule.
Absolutely. Okay. Agreed. Anyone else? Nope. Okay, thank you. Our next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Wednesday the 9th of June and we'll be in room 29 and I'm anticipating then that will be a 12 noon conclusion, so just be mindful of that. And can I just advise those who are in the rooms, Roy and I and staff, we need to just maintain our social distancing before we leave the meeting. So members are content, we are adjourned. Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound.